Hello. If I could get everybody to grab a seat, please. We're going to start in just a second. Right here. Thank you. Hello. There we are. Well, good morning, everybody. Okay. So thank you for coming, and I want to really appreciate Walton County and our speakers, which I'll introduce in a moment. Real quick, logistics. So some of you may know this. There are food. I got all kind of victuals in there, but as everyone knows, the person that buys it, it's their taste that it reflects. So if you don't see something that you like, hate me, and I apologize. But there are water, drinks, sodas. So the soda's in the cooler and water. If you take one, if you could, just put the same kind back in there so we kind of keep them rotated and keep them cold. That'd be awesome. But restrooms out the hallway, to the right, and then to the right again. And we want to have this a very productive workshop. We've got some great experts here on estuary programs, and it's an opportunity to learn about what they are, how they operate, and hopefully tee us up so when EPA gets their proposal funded, which hopefully will happen, that we'll be going after to creating some estuary programs. So I hope that you all enjoy yourself. If you have any questions, please let me know. The way we're going to do this is going to be live streamed and recorded, which is great, so that future audiences will be able to see this and spread it into our communities further. So what we will do is ask for the presentations will occur, and then any questions we'll have right after the presentation is done. And Madison, back there, will have the microphone and pass it out to you. If we can just have you say who you are and what your question is, and that way we can get it on the recording. So, are there any questions at this point? Awesome. So thank you all so much for coming. I know your time's important. And I'd like to introduce Larry Jones, County Administrator for Walton County, for his welcome. Thank you.
Thanks, Daryl. We appreciate each of you being here today. Daryl, we appreciate your efforts of putting this meeting together. We know it's going to be a great benefit to each of you. Thank you for coming to Walton County. We're certainly proud and glad to host this event today. If Melinda Gates would raise her hand, and Bill Williams, stand up, Bill. He is standing there. Get a chair. There are our staff in Walton County do a great job for us. If you need anything today, please don't hesitate to reach out to them. If you need a place to go make phone calls or do some work, they'll point you in a direction to get you some privacy. We're proud to have a number of elected officials with us today. Warren Yeager, Commissioner from Gulf County. Behind him is one of my bosses, actually my favorite commissioner. I think she's the only one here, so she would be my favorite today. It's recorded, so Cecilia Jones, and next to her is Casey Kitchens from the City of Freeport City Council, Kevin Brown with Representative Brox's office. Any other elected officials or representatives of elected officials? We know you all come from somewhere where there's elected officials, but we appreciate you guys being here, and take back to your respective places what you take away here from today. But again, we're pleased that Walton County was selected to host this meeting. We hope it's all you expect it to be. Hope you brought your credit cards, have time for dinners and shopping and all those wonderful things that we have. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Daryl, but don't hesitate to let any of us know if there's anything we can do to make your stay here today more pleasant. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. So, Kevin, did you want to say something from the representative's office?
Sure. As Larry said, my name's Kevin. As Larry said, my name's Kevin Brown. I'm from Representative Doug Broxton's office. Thanks for having us today. It's great to get out of Tallahassee. Unfortunately, the representative couldn't be here. He's still stuck in special session right now, but Restore is a major issue for our office and obviously for this area, and if there's anything we can do on a state level to help you, please let us know. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Commissioner, Councilwoman, you would like to say?
Just make sure that you go look at our 26 miles of the most beautiful beaches in the world. Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Okay. Well, with that, I'm just going to real quickly introduce our panelists. I'm going to call you all panelists, workshopists. And so we have Roberta Swan from the Mobile Bay NEP program. We have Bob Howard from Region 4 Estuary Program Manager. I probably butchered that, but that's the function. We have John Bowie from EPA's Gulf of Mexico program and the, I guess, the point person for the Pot 2 proposal that we'll be talking about today. Phil Coram with DEP. Phil and I go way back, and I have the world of respect for Phil and all the stuff that he has done, and appreciate you being here to talk from the state of Florida perspective. Holly Greening from Tampa Bay Estuary Program, and so thankful for she's here because we're going to hear what these programs are capable of doing and the results that they achieve. And then finally, Commissioner Justice from Pinellas County, and I really appreciate you taking the time to be here because I think hearing from a fellow county commissioner and from someone at the local level that sees the results and works with these programs is tremendously important for you to be here. And so two last people that I want to introduce, Janet Bowman and Bob Bendick are with the Nature Conservancy, and Bob is our director of the Gulf of Mexico program, and Janet is my counterpart here in Florida. She works at the state level. I work with local governments. And so real quickly, I just want to thank you all again for attending. I know each of you have very busy schedules, and this means a lot to me both personally and professionally because this is a huge opportunity for the Panhandle. When Restore started a few years back, the Southwest Florida NEPs did a great job of coming together with their individual plans and regionalizing it and coming up with priorities for Restore. And it's been a very well-respected document at all levels of government. And that's not something we were able to do in the Panhandle because we don't have those entities here. And so the Nature Conservancy has been working over the past couple of years to, as Grover Robinson would like to call it, the poor man's NEP process, and trying to bring people together to develop watershed plans. But really and truly, the estuary program is really the model as far as how to work together at all levels of governments and with the community to identify watershed priorities and make real stuff happen. And so no more from me. I want you to hear from the experts. I just want to appreciate all of you for being here and all of our speakers for being here. So the next thing I'd like to do is pass the microphone. If you could just state your name and where you're from, and then just real quickly, and then we'll get started.
Hello, I'm Lori Sear. I'm publisher of WaltonOutdoors.com. I'm here to learn today.
Good morning. My name is Paul Johnson. I work with a firm called Ecology and Environment based out of Tallahassee, Florida.
I'm Glenn Horvath with Swanee River Water Management from Live Oak.
Bob Brook, I'm from Walton County. I live on one of the beautiful beaches here.
I'm Keith Wilkins, Community Environment Director for Escambia County.
Good morning, I'm Stella Wilson. I'm with Dewberry out of Pensacola.
Good morning, I'm Kari Servold. I live in Mobile, but I'm recently with Dewberry, so I'm excited to be here and learn as well.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Debbie DeVore with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service with our Gulf Restoration Program.
Channing St. Aubin, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Panama City Field Office.
Good morning, Tracy Goodhart with the West Florida Regional Planning Council. I'm their environmental coordinator and regional planner.
Hi, I'm Rick O'Connor with Florida Sea Grant in Escambia County.
Laura Tew with Florida Sea Grant, Walton, and Okaloosa counties.
Hi, I'm Jessica Kelsch with National Wildlife Federation.
Janet Bowman with the Nature Conservancy in Tallahassee.
Pam Latham, ESA and RPI in Tallahassee.
Jeff Helms with Atkins. I'm the consultant for Santa Rosa County's Restore program.
I'm Warren Yeager, County Commissioner in Gulf County, Florida.
Carol T. Bay, Santa Rosa County.
I'm Barbara Albrecht. I'm with the Panhandle Watershed Alliance.
Bob Bendick, the Nature Conservancy.
I'm Chip Kirshenfeld, manage the Water Quality and Land Management Division for Escambia County.
I'm Paul Thorpe with the Northwest Florida Water Management District.
Good morning, Robert Amrazani, Eglin Air Force Base.
Morning, Rick Owen, Okaloosa County Restore Act Coordinator.
Melinda Gates, the Coastal Resource Liaison for Walton County.
Jim Muller, Restore Act Coordinator for Bay County.
Kelly Samick, Gulf Restoration Coordinator for the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission out of Tallahassee.
Lisa Robertson, Florida Department of Environmental Protection, Deepwater Horizon Unit.
Good morning. I'm Casey Cutchins with the City of Freeport City Council.
Good morning, Cecilia Jones, Walton County Commissioner.
Good morning again, Kevin Brown with Representative Broxton's office.
Good morning, Mike Dombrowski with MRD Associates, coastal engineering firm out of Destin.
Jim Trafilio, coastal management coordinator with Okaloosa County.
Duncan Greer with Taylor Engineering.
Good morning, Tim Haig, Director of Government Affairs with Emerald Coast Utilities Authority in Pensacola.
Good morning, Catherine Gross. I'm a Walton County resident. I've been doing some research in the coastal dune lakes.
Good morning, Bill Williams, Walton County Restore Act Coordinator.
Madison Williams out of Representative Broxton's office.
And I want to congratulate Bill for keeping that as short as he did. I think that's a record. So again, thank you all very much, and let's get started. So the first speaker is going to be Phil. So Phil, here you go.
Very good. Well, good morning. Very much appreciate the opportunity to participate in this workshop. Thank Daryl and TNC for involving us. We have tried to engage in all the watershed meetings that have been occurring across the Panhandle. Been specifically asked to talk about the status of Florida's Restore Bucket 2 submissions. Anytime I talk about Restore, I like to use this chart courtesy of the Ocean Conservancy. There will be a test at the end of my presentation on the various sources of funding associated with Deepwater Horizon. We're here to talk about one little piece of the various funding sources. Many folks in this room have worked with the state of Florida in putting together proposals for the various sources of funding associated with Deepwater Horizon, whether that's natural resource damage assessment, whether it's Restore, or whether it's National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, the Gulf Environmental Benefit Fund. So thanks to all of you for helping the state of Florida put very good proposals together for the various funding sources to help restore the Gulf of Mexico. Today we're talking about just one of the funding sources. This is what's called the council selected component of the Restore Act. There are essentially 5 sources or pots of money associated with the Restore Act. These pots of money are funded through Clean Water Act penalties assessed or collected from the responsible parties associated with the Deepwater Horizon event. At this point in time, the only responsible party that has settled its Clean Water Act violations is Transocean. They settled their Clean Water Act violations for about $1 billion, in which 80% of that amount flowed to the Gulf Coast Ecosystem Restoration Trust Fund, and there's a percentage on how that money is split up between the various pots of money. So we're here to talk about Pot 2, Bucket 2, or what's called the Council Selected Component. Unlike some of the other sources of money, it's sort of a competitive pot of money. The Restoration Council itself, which consists of representatives of the 5 Gulf Coast states and 6 federal agencies, will have the ultimate decision on which projects to fund. There's no guarantee that any Florida proposals will be selected for funding, but we are cautiously optimistic that Florida will get projects funded through this bucket of money. The council asked all of its council members to submit 5 proposals in for funding, and those proposals were sent by all the council members in November of last year. Florida submitted 5 proposals in. They're all listed here, a total of about $78 million in our 5 proposals. I'll talk a little bit more about them. But the council has said that at least for the initial round of funding, they're going to allocate between $150 to $180 million to fund projects through this pot of money. I want to talk just very briefly about the proposals Florida submitted. It's great that we're talking about estuaries and watersheds today, because that's how Florida put together its proposals. We had essentially all of our proposals were watershed based or estuary based. We bundled projects together within an estuary or within a watershed, and so our proposals were truly watershed based. And we had a Apalachicola Bay watershed proposal. We had a Pensacola Bay watershed proposal. We had a Suwannee River watershed proposal, and we had a Tampa Bay watershed proposal. And then we had our last proposal that we submitted, essentially came out of a concept advocated by TNC and the 8 Panhandle counties to put a Northwest Estuaries proposal together. And I'll talk a little bit more about that specific proposal that was sent to the council. So again, this was our last proposal, Northwest Estuaries proposal. Again, the idea, the concept came from the Nature Conservancy in our 8 Panhandle counties. And what it essentially would have done was try to build on watershed planning in the Panhandle. So it included, as part of that proposal, to update the Northwest Florida Water Management District swim plans, to reserve or allocate funds for the design and permitting and environmental compliance for projects that may come out of that swim planning, to actually reserve some money to implement the projects that would come out of those swim plans, and then reserve some money for project monitoring. That total proposal was almost $17 million. What we told the council is this proposal would leverage, $175 million in other funds that have come out of the Deepwater Horizon sources of money, NERDA and NIFWIF. So this, again, trying to advocate for the watershed concept, watershed planning in the Panhandle. Daryl had mentioned, I guess, NEP, ENVI, but I think the Panhandle it's time to start doing something similar that's been done along the southwest coast and start doing it up here in the Panhandle. The resources up here are just outstanding, need to be preserved and protected. Okay. So we were just one council member. There are 11 council members in total. Each one of them was allowed to submit 5 proposals. This is sort of the summary. I'm not a liar when you see more than 5 for some of the federal agencies. If you see that a federal agency submitted more than 5 proposals, it was a tribal proposal that they were allowed to submit for tribes along the Gulf Coast. So there were 50 proposals totaling $788 million. You can do the math. The council has $180 million available to fund the project, so you can see, not every project or proposal submitted will get funded. In fact, most won't, simply if you do the math. Wanted to talk a little bit about Florida. We submitted 5, but there were 4 other proposals submitted by federal council members specifically for proposals within the state of Florida. The Army Corps of Engineers submitted an Egmont Key restoration proposal down in the Tampa Bay area. Department of Interior submitted 2 tribal proposals dealing with essentially monitoring or planning in tribal lands in South Florida associated with Everglades restoration. And there was a large U.S. Department of Agriculture proposal in the Apalachicola Bay area, which would have done restoration within Tate's Hill State Forest, would have done hydrologic, will do hydrologic assessment work in other lands in the Apalachicola area, and then it had a private land stewardship component associated with it. So, there were 9 specific proposals for 4 projects within the state of Florida. By location, this is how it's sort of split up between the proposals. There were 13 Gulf-wide proposals, and then there was a whole bunch of proposals within states. And so I talked a little bit about Florida. Louisiana, you could see there were a lot of proposals in Louisiana. Louisiana had 5, but many federal agencies also had proposals to be located in the state of Louisiana. Also sort of split it up by Gulf-wide versus individual states. You can see Florida, there was a lot of proposals for the state of Florida totaling about $134 million. We also looked at it by category, and these categories are something that DEP came up with, not council staff. We tried to look at the proposals and see what was that proposal primarily addressing, whether it was land acquisition, whether it was beneficial use of dredged sediments, whether there were projects specifically associated with estuary programs, whether it be EPA's NEP programs or NOAA's National Estuarine Research Reserve programs. Then we broke it down into what proposals are actually doing on the ground restoration, whether that's hydrologic restoration, whether that's living shorelines, whether that's marsh creation, and then proposals that were primarily geared towards planning for the future, for hopefully additional funds that will be made available in the future once BP settles its Clean Water Act violations. So these were planning and monitoring type proposals. You can see the numbers there, how the proposals sort of split out between these various categories of project types and who was the one submitting the proposal, those types of proposals. There were some estuary or watershed specific proposals. Department of Commerce had one. It was called a Conservation Corps restoration proposal, in which folks would be trained in doing restoration. Actual restoration work would be done at National Estuarine Research Reserves throughout the Gulf. EPA had a couple, and John and Bob will be talking about those. Mississippi had their own estuary proposal, Mississippi Sound Estuarine Program. Again, sort of standing up a NEP type program within the state of Mississippi, and I already talked about Florida's Northwest Estuaries proposal. We mapped all the projects out. You can't really see it, but the projects are, you know, scattered across the Gulf Coast. There were two sort of geographic locations where you saw a lot of proposals sort of focusing on certain geographic areas. One was in sort of Apalachicola, and the other one was sort of Mobile Bay. You saw a lot of council members with proposals in those two geographic areas. Since we submitted our proposals and all the council members submitted their proposals last November, council staff has been asking additional information about all the proposals that were submitted. First, they asked us, how specifically does your proposal address the council's goals, objectives, and commitments as identified in the council's comprehensive plan? So, state of Florida, like every other council member, had to provide council staff with additional information on that. They've asked a lot of information about environmental compliance. How ready is this project ready to proceed? Does it have its permits? Has Endangered Species Act concerns already been addressed? So we've been asked for a lot of information on environmental compliance, and all council members have had to provide council staff with additional information on all their proposals. They've also asked for additional budget breakdowns. You know, we provided some budget information, but they specifically wanted all council members to break up your budgets into planning, design components versus actual construction or implementation components. So again, all council members have had to provide that information to council staff. They were very interested in leveraging information, how these projects leverage with other projects out there, whether it's in Florida. In its proposal, we had done a very good job of showing how our proposals was leveraging other Deepwater Horizon funding sources that we've got money for. So the council essentially asked all the other council members to do something similar. How does the proposals that you're proposing leverage with, you know, adjoining projects, or leveraging with, you know, are you expanding a project that's been funded through some other source? So they asked for that type of leveraging information. And finally, they asked us to try to the best of our abilities to quantify the benefits, the environmental benefits of our proposals. So acres of seagrasses restored, or acres of marsh created, you know, linear feet of living shorelines, those types of metrics they've asked us to quantify what benefits that our proposals we submitted to the council would achieve. So A lot of work, the EPA and the state of Florida, all the council members, folks like me and John have been, and Lisa and Kelly Samick, we've all been, you know, trying to get this information back to the council to allow them to select the proposals they intend to fund. Okay. What we're hearing from council staff is we're hearing that a draft of the funded list will occur sometime this summer. We're hoping it's, you know, not late summer. We hope it's sort of middle summer. They do plan on having public meetings once they come out with the draft lists of projects. They will do a series of, we understand, public meetings in each state to solicit public comment on the proposals the council's intended to fund. There'll be a long public comment period. You know, they truly want public comment. I believe public comment will likely influence what the final list of projects will be. And the, you know, what we're hearing is sort of they'd like to do all this and have a final vote by the council members on the projects they intend to fund, hopefully by the end of this year. So this is what we're hearing from council staff. It's the best information I have right now on the schedule and timing of things. The council's been pretty good at meeting the schedules that it's laid out for itself as far as the comprehensive plan, the submittal of bucket 2 proposals. So we're cautiously optimistic that this schedule would be adhered to. That's really all I have on the status of the Florida bucket 2 submissions, and be glad to answer any questions anybody has.
Bill, with regard to leverage, did y'all look at leverage outside of Deepwater Horizon, meaning when we look at, is this on? Yeah. Leverage related to outside of Deepwater Horizon, if there are other federal agencies you could leverage with or other sources of leveraging?
We certainly tried to, in a qualitative sense, for instance, on Tampa Bay, you know, millions or billions of dollars have been spent on improving Tampa Bay over the years. We didn't try to quantify that too much. It was more of a qualitative information on leveraging. We did try to quantify all the Deepwater Horizon stuff. So, you know, NERDA projects, NIFLIF projects, certain oyster projects in Apalachicola Bay. We did go to great deal to quantify that leveraging information. We certainly told the council, for instance, on Bayou Chico, you know, we had a Bayou Chico proposal, and, you know, the local community there has put in a lot of money to restore Bayou Chico. We did try to quantify that a little bit with the Bayou Chico Basin Action Management Plan. So very much appreciate those folks who provided us with that leveraging information.
Phil, I was curious, did the council members go to the people that had proposed and asked for any continuity in proposals and opportunities for collaboration before or after the proposals were submitted?
I'll say this for the state of Florida, we collaborated before we submitted our proposals. So we reached out to certain federal agencies and said, look, here's what we're thinking, what are you guys thinking, is there any way we can coordinate a little bit? And, you know, that if you actually look at the proposals, you'll see that, you know, certain council members had proposals very similar to ours or built off of ours, especially the Apalachicola proposal. You know, we had 2 council members, federal council members, also submitting projects in the Apalachicola Bay area that were complementary of the ones that DEP did. So certainly we did that coordination before we submitted our proposals, and council staff has been encouraging all council members to continue to collaborate as we move forward in this process.
Are there any other questions? Okay, and if I could ask y'all, just remind you, this is being recorded so that it can be live streamed and viewed later. So if you could say your name and then ask your question, that'd be great. Thanks.
Jeff Helms with Atkins Field, great presentation. One of the things that we've heard in San Jose County in the Pensacola watershed is the sampling and the monitoring of the water and the quality of the water, so you have the metrics before and after it. And I really like the estuary program and the plan the EPA is looking at for Northwest Florida. And I just want to encourage whatever partnerships we can do to ensure that we have the proper sampling and monitoring to substantiate the NEP program and its results are a major part of that program. I think would go a long way to its success and validating it to the public and anything we can do to help bring in additional partnerships from a county level through the direct component, whatever we need to do. I think that's a great approach. So thanks.
The only thing I'd say on that is, there are federal council members' proposals that do have a significant monitoring component to it. I think in Florida, we're very blessed with a robust ambient water quality monitoring program. Folks involved with the establishment of numeric nutrient criteria, I think have an understanding of how much monitoring goes on in the state, whether it's DEP, whether it's FWC, whether it's the local governments, whether it's organizations like the Choctawhatchee Basin Alliance who's doing a lot of monitoring. We're very fortunate in the state of Florida that we do have a lot of monitoring data we can look to be able to demonstrate improvements over time, I think, and the benefits of these projects.
Okay, anybody else? All right, next, John Bowie, I'm guessing, is going to go first. And did you have a presentation, John? Or you just going to speak from the heart? Okay, sorry, Phil.
No problem.
Sorry, while he's setting that up, I just want to remind people, if anybody came in late, didn't sign in, if you can sign up here. And again, the snacks, if you get thirsty, food, are over there. Sound good?
Don't touch. Is that working okay? Can y'all hear me all right? Thank you. My name is John Bowie, and I really appreciate the opportunity for EPA to be able to sit with the folks here and have a conversation with you regarding the Restore Council and also EPA's proposal to the Council, as well as an opportunity for you to hear from some of the existing NEPs across the Gulf that are to the left and to the right of the Panhandle of Florida, to give you a good look and feel at the benefits that it has brought to those regions. And Phil has already given an extensive overview of the council and where they sit today. So what I would do is just focus a little bit on what we submitted. EPA submitted a number of proposals. One of those, and I'll just focus in on this particular one, one of those was to take basically what we perceive as tremendous successes through the existing NEP structure across the Gulf region. We have 7 NEPs across the Gulf, and then we have another one that's not an official NEP, but it's located in Lake Pontchartrain Basin. And between all of those, we've just seen tremendous successes for the communities that they're in and the regions that they're in. We think they've been able to very successfully drive many changes for those estuaries and those watersheds. They're sort of a gathering point, if you will, in our opinion, for those communities to rally around specific issues of their estuaries and their watersheds. And they have the unique ability to do that, probably more so than state agencies or federal agencies. We stand in support of them, so does the states. But we think they can definitely bring a lot to those communities and regions. So we submitted a proposal to play off of that and propose to develop and stand up place-based estuary programs across a number of estuaries across the Gulf that are not currently served by NEPs. And because of the way NEPs are established, this proposal is not to establish NEPs, it's National Estuary Programs, which is a defined program, but it's to develop estuary programs, but based on the same tried and true responses that we've had under the NEP programs. So if we are successful in doing so, in getting council funding for it, and with support of Florida, at that point, then we would move forward, and we would have a number of things we would need to do if we're successful. We would need to establish the host organization for that program, and then we would need to work through that host to hire the key staff necessary for that program to stand itself up and to develop its own plan, and then to move forward. We would also develop management as well as help them in developing their own management committee, as well as technical committees that would be each of these committees, as well as the management committee, as well as the technical committee. They're not just going to be folks from EPA, or they're going to be stakeholders that are very key to those communities and those watersheds and those estuaries. But they will also include some folks from EPA, the regional offices, the Gulf Program Office. Our program is sort of across both Region 4 and Region 6. And then in addition to that, for the technical committee, we propose to bring in some of our key folks from existing NEP programs to help in developing these new ones, simply because they've been around, they've seen what's worked, what hasn't worked. We don't want to create something that won't work. So we want to really rely on them helping this new host organization to develop a very successful estuary program. So once again, it'll be modeled after, we intend to model it after the structure and operation of the existing NEP programs, but it will not be a designated NEP. The technical support team would engage the leadership and representatives of EPA, Florida, the local stakeholders, et cetera, to ensure that the program is stood up and would have full access, as I mentioned before, full access to the estuary program's expertise and knowledge, not only internal to EPA, but also external from the various programs. And we have two of those here today. And that technical team would also assist the management conference in a number of other areas, integrating science, developing their comprehensive conservation management plans. And, so one of the first things that would have to occur is you've got to designate or determine where we're going to host that. And I don't mean so much physically, but capacity-wise, because you don't want it inside. It needs to be very independent, and I think you'll hear that from listening to both Holly and Roberta, because its success, from what we've gathered from the years of working with the existing NEPs in the Gulf, and from hearing from NEPs across the country, is that independence has gone a long way towards their success. So we want to ensure that that happens as best we can. And, you know, at the end of the day, we have to see where it's going to come out from the council. We are, as Phil mentioned, we're cautiously optimistic that it will, some portion of it will survive and it will be funded. We think it's, from looking around the room here, we think it's a concept that is very well liked by the public. There's been a lot of positive feedback that has been heard around the development of estuary programs. And, you know, also the council is, they very early on realized and decided that they wanted to focus everything based on watersheds. They wanted to compartmentalize and look at things on watersheds across the Gulf region. That's been an excellent approach. And that dovetails right into what we feel like we proposed. And I don't want to take away from what Holly and from what Roberta will say, because they're going to tell you the boots on the ground, how it's worked for them. And you're going to have a lot more questions for her than you will for me, because at this point, ours is a proposal in front of the council, and it is to stand up estuary programs in a number of estuaries. We have to see where that comes out, but the method we would intend to do is very similar to what we did with the NEPs on standing them up. And we would also, in addition, we would borrow heavily from the folks that have been around a long time doing this, so that they can help make sure that this is a success. And as far as what we had in a proposal, we had it proposed only to carry it through standing it up and bringing it through the establishment and approval of its plan, the development and the approval of its plan. Once that's done, then there will need to be some additional funding. And what we would hope to see, and I think you'll probably hear this from the existing NEPs as well, is that having that critical local support from stakeholders is very important to the success of the program, not only from a financial perspective, but also from a success perspective. So, you know, during that period of time, you're going to be looking, we would hope that the local stakeholders would begin to look at how they're going to continue to operate this program and ensure the program is continuing. There are other buckets of funds through Restore that the counties may look at and say, that's a good fit. That's a well-used fit for those dollars, some of those dollars. So, you know, with that, once again, I think that's as far as I could probably really tell you at this point. We think it's a good proposal. So, with that, I would just say, are there any questions?
Hi there. Thank you so much for bringing this forward. I'm Barbara Albrecht. I used to work with the Nature Conservancy. I'm the president of the Brim Fishermen's Association, which is a water quality monitoring group that's been doing monitoring in this area for 50 years. There are a number of stakeholder groups that monitor, whether it's the St. Andrew Resource Management Group, or whether it's the Choctawhatchee Basin Alliance, or the Friends of Perdido Bay, the BFA, and we've been getting by on a shoestring budget without any kind of support, and this would really lend itself to having so many different groups become a part of an organization like your NEPs, which are so successful. And this is such a beautiful concept. I know Audubon is very excited about this. Native Plant Society groups are very excited about this. It just opens so many opportunities for leveraging, and often decisions like this are made from the top down. I represent the subsistence fishermen that go out to the ditches and collect dinner. We need this for all of our waterways. We're concentrated on our bays, but we need this as inland as well. So thank you for bringing this forward. And if you need a champion from the bottom up, I'm your gal.
Thank you.
Hi, good morning, Catherine Gross. My question was, if these are not going to be NEPs under the actual NEP program, then does that mean that there's no provision for recurring funding like the NEP program has, or is that what you were saying about you'll have to look for additional funds elsewhere?
That's correct. Currently, the NEP program is tapped out with regard to being able to expand itself to bring in new NEPs. And you could probably hear that from the two folks that are here. There are 28, excuse me. I don't know why I thought 17. There are 28 around the country currently. And until Congress approves additional funds for the program, that's where it would remain. So for this particular one, we chose the route of proposing estuary programs, Gulf of Mexico estuary programs, utilizing the experience of the existing NEPs, but recognizing that they would not be designated NEPs. Where that may be in 10 years, I couldn't answer that. But that's where we are today.
So is the idea then that we get these established, and once they become successful and popular, the funds will come from somewhere? Is that?
Well, you know, I hate to jump in, but maybe Holly and Roberta in their presentations could talk a little bit about their funding structures. I understand EPA money was critical in standing up the program, but I got a feeling the EPA recurring funds are not, at this point in time, the largest percentage of funding for either one of those entities, I would guess. So hopefully, Holly and Roberta will talk a little bit about that.
Oh, great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions?
And again, thank you for doing this. Local governments have supported the watershed as soon as we got out of the, as soon as we first began looking at things before Restore even became a program. And we appreciate Daryl and all the work they've done in putting this forward. So we certainly have been supportive. The question we've had is, while individual estuaries certainly would be more independent within their own communities, we've sort of also been keeping all Northwest Florida estuaries together in trying to package them to go forward, at least in a presentation way. Just curious as to how you said, you know, moving forward, would we continue to keep all of them together, or would this be something independent on each individual estuary? That's I think a question we have as we move forward after this, if this process gets set up and then we go forward.
You know, I don't think I can answer that question for you right now. We did not predefine the sizes of those estuary programs or the geographic area to be encompassed. So, you know, that's about all I can tell you right now. We did not define it that tightly.
Given that, and the similarity between the state of Florida and EPA's proposals, Phil, I would say, one, how do they mesh together or not? And Phil, is there a concept at the state level of how these would be managed or could be managed?
Okay. Well, I'll give that a little bit of a shot. First, it was great for you asking that question because I had to go back and provide a little bit more information on our Northwest Estuaries program. If you remember our proposal, our proposal to the Restore Council, the first item that we wanted funding was to update the watershed swim plans. We're always looking at targets opportunity for the various funding sources. So we have gotten through NIFWIF, through Kelly Samek's tremendous efforts, we've gotten the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation to essentially agree to pay for updates of the watershed or swim plans, not only in the Northwest Florida Water Management District, but also in the Suwannee River Water Management District through NIFWIF funding. So, you know, our Northwest Florida Estuaries proposal, our first task, is actually going to be funded through a different Deepwater Horizon funding source. So we're very, you know, you go after the funding source that you have the greatest confidence in, and so target of opportunity came up, and so we're getting a major element of our Northwest Florida Estuaries proposal already funded through a different Deepwater source. Sort of the remaining tasks were to reserve money for implementing the projects that come out of that planning process. I've told you the council has specifically asked us for information. One of the things they ask us for is to quantify the benefits. It was very difficult for us to specifically quantify acreage, linear feet, or pounds of pollutants removed from this proposal. Okay? Because those plans haven't been updated, we don't know what the specific projects are. But we have a similar proposal from EPA, you know, that essentially was trying to do something very similar. That is to do the watershed planning, to stand up estuary programs to develop their own management plans. So, you know, between those two proposals, again, I think we're cautiously optimistic that, you know, the council will end up hopefully funding a piece or part of one of our proposals. That's about the only way I can answer that question. You know, both proposals were wrapped up. You know, it's the local communities that have to be engaged. It wasn't going to be EPA or the state of Florida dictating what needed to be done in those watersheds. It was intended to be consensus-based, local-based. You know, that's how both of our proposals were intended to operate. That it would be the locals deciding, you know, what's important for their watersheds and that sort of thing. So as far as, I'm not sure I answered your question. I've gone off track, but it was great you asked that question because I could go back and talk about the swim plan. So very much appreciate you asking that question.
One thing I'm going to try and move this, and I hope it doesn't make too much sense. Didn't work, did it? One thing I would add is the planning you're seeing in here, this truly will be complementary to an estuary program, because an estuary program will be much more comprehensive. It's not just looking at one component, it's an aggregation of components. And it's by no means does it mean that all funding flows through there for every project associated with clean water and watershed planning, et cetera. It is a much larger planning body focused on looking at a number of things. And so Holly and Roberta, I hope I haven't overstepped on that, but that's the way I've always envisioned those as being. You still have those components existing in your estuary programs, but they're not necessarily something that the NEP does. They're done by some of those bodies. But those bodies also reside or are a part of their management committee.
Glenn Horvath, if I understand right, your proposals creating a process
and doesn't identify areas to, to create the structures, to create the organization, so to speak.
That's correct. That estuary program, once it's stood up, in the process of standing itself up, it will determine what the stressors are. That management committee, that technical committee, the public, they're very much involved with the public. All of that will come together in developing their plan.
But you haven't identified the geographic areas for these.
Have not. The only way we identified it in the proposal was we said that we were going to focus on estuaries that were not currently served by existing NEPs.
Jeff Helms again. What I'm hearing is that you're going to stand it up, and if the respective watersheds, like the Pensacola Bay watershed, develop a plan to carry the sustainability 10 years out in the future, that would be something that you would be very much interested in the ground floor of your developing your process once it's funded, if it's funded. So if you have a stand-up organization that meets the metrics of what you're talking about, independence, et cetera, that could carry it forward, that would be something from a financial resources and staffing, that would be something that you would be very much interested in seeing happen.
Yes.
Okay, that's good because that helps, Commissioner Robinson and others, Wilkins, and
it goes directly to the heart of the viability and the strength of the host organization, and that is the very key first point that has to be done.
Because we've been having these discussions, how do we make sure it's a generational success?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the key we keep hearing, and I think our commissioners understand that. And it's just a matter of putting the programs together, working with you. Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? All right. Daryl, you just asked the question. How many, you said there were a number of watersheds. Obviously, we have, 8 in Northwest Florida that weren't NEPs. How many total did you have across the Gulf that were included in your proposal?
We didn't. In the proposal to the council, we identified something in the order of 8 to 12 estuaries, key estuaries across the Gulf that were not currently served by existing NEPs. That doesn't necessarily mean, I was pretty creative we were pretty creative when we wrote some of those. So that doesn't necessarily mean that it covers everyone, or we may have renamed something, but we tried to be fairly true to the map.
Anybody else?
Just to follow up to Commissioner Robinson's question, was that 8 to 12 Gulf-wide?
Yes.
Do you have similar efforts like what TNC has sponsored here going on in other states?
Not that I'm aware of. We became familiar with TNC's effort, which I believe is being somewhat funded through some other sources of funds. But we became familiar with that. Daryl, when was that? About 2 years ago or a year and a half ago?
Yes, sir.
We had some conversations with Daryl and folks from TNC and leadership from Region 4. We were very interested in what we saw. There's been a lot of effort put into it. So what we envisioned was that this may be a way to take it to the next level, take some of that and begin to pool it in, and then develop something that, as the gentleman over here mentioned, that would be generational, that would be here for your kids, your grandkids, and would be always looking out for things in the estuaries and the watersheds.
Awesome. Any other questions? Love the way you ended that. So next, we're going to, and it's not on the agenda necessarily, but Bob's going to talk about, if I'm going to try to lift this to see if that, actually, let's shut it off first. That did not work. Sorry. Take it away, Bob. Oh, sorry.
Push it back and see, yes, there we go. My name's Bob Howard, and I'm in the Atlanta office of EPA, and I am the regional NEP coordinator for EPA in Region 4. We have, as we've said before, we have 28 national estuary programs around the country. We have 6 located within Region 4 in the 8 southeastern states. And I'm really excited to see the people here that are not directly involved in the National Estuary Program, but have heard about it, are excited about it, and are thinking that this might be something that you would like to bring to your community. So that really is exciting to me. I've been involved with the estuary program for 20 years. I was around when the estuary programs were created. And I wanted to take just a moment to explain that process to you and kind of set the stage for Roberta and Holly to tell you more specifically about their NEPs. The NEP program was set up in the late 80s. It was part of the Clean Water Act amendments. And it had in the act some areas which were to be given priority for consideration of being a national estuary program. In order to be considered, the governor had to nominate these locations and submit an extensive package for consideration, which then was a competitive program nationally. Out of that program, we had, I think, 4 different selection processes. And the NEPs were established starting in around '89 and finished up, I think, in the mid-'90s to make a total of 28. We haven't had any additional national estuary programs designated since the mid-'90s. There have been a number of communities who have expressed interest and concern about trying to get into the program. So far, Congress has not decided to provide an opportunity for communities to add to the program. And right now, based on the information that I've seen and what Congress seems to be interested in moving forward, it does not appear that there is likely to be, in the near future, any additions to the program. I wanted to just briefly say from my experience what the power and what's really significant about the National Estuary Program. First off, it's essentially a 3-leg stool. One, and most importantly, it has a management conference. It sets up an organizational structure which engages and involves the community, the key decision makers, the science community, and the public. And quite frankly, if you're looking at the success of the NEPs, the management conference is the place that you really have to look. They have set the consensus approach, they've set the goals, they've set a community structure to allow for success. The second is the program office. And this is equally important. You need to have a dedicated staff that is committed to that resource and supports the management conference. We have great NEP directors in Region 4 and around the country. I think they would tell you that it may be one of the best jobs that a person could possibly have. You're working at all levels of government and the public, and you're doing great things that you possibly couldn't otherwise do. But it is critical that you have a designated director and a program staff to support in order to get the job done. And the third leg of the stool is a dedicated funding source. We've had a dedicated funding source under the NEP program for the 25 years of its existence. That has varied in the amount of money that has gone into the program, but lately it's been between $500,000 and $600,000 per year to support the program office and the management conference. I want to emphasize that that money is not really for doing the implementation. That money supports the conference, supports the program office. It has some money that goes to implementation, but largely the implementation occurs through the partners. The NEP itself is not the program office. The NEP is not the director. The NEP is not EPA. The NEP is the management conference. It is the grouping of people working together toward common goals. And that's why it's been successful. I want to say a quick word about leveraging. This is a very good way of being able to measure how effective the programs are in bringing in the communities. Our NEPs have had a leveraging of about $10 to $15 per dollar invested. They're bringing this from a variety of sources, and it is a strength of the NEP program. And finally, I want to say something about size. We were talking about size. And size is an extremely important component for an NEP because it is involved at the local level. Size can dramatically change what you can and can't do. We have an estuary program in Albemarle Pamlico Sound, the coast of North Carolina, and it includes about 2/3 of the state of North Carolina. It is huge, and because of that, it really changes what that program can do. And then we have Sarasota Bay, which is a very small program, which is an intimate program, really involving all of the local communities. And just another word about that, $500,000 to support something that's 2/3 of the state of North Carolina versus a smaller program. Its size does matter. With that, I'm going to go ahead and let the people who are on the ground and doing the work and our great NEP directors and great NEP programs talk about what they've been able to accomplish and quit talking about it from a regional standpoint. So are we starting with who are we starting with?
Roberta? I'm not touching that mic.
I'm afraid it's going to shock me.
Somebody else can take it after that.
Let me try.
Good morning. My name is Roberta Solon, and I'm the director of the Mobility National Estuary Program. This program since 2004. Oops. Do you mind if I sit?
No.
Okay. I mean, I could stand.
You sit right there.
Okay. Been with the program since 2004, and I'm going to tell you a couple things about myself that are going to come back through this presentation as we go on. In high school, I was voted most spirited. That's going to come back. That's going to come back. It has come back to bite me in places I won't tell you. I got an undergraduate degree in economics and a master's in business with a focus on marketing and focus on public sector management. I was in the Peace Corps in Togo, West Africa for a couple of years, working with tribes in third world countries. And I came to Alabama and started work there as a fundraising consultant and learning about migratory bird habitat on Dolphin Island, Alabama, which is where we moved originally. We live on the next island up right now. I'm telling you this because you're going to see these themes as I talk about what it's like to manage an estuary program. So first of all, Bob had talked to you a little bit about the program. It is funded by the EPA. For us, we also receive funding from the state of Alabama and local governments and some private interests. We're one of 28 in the United States, and we've been in existence since 1995, so we're on our 20th year right now. We are guided by a comprehensive conservation management plan and a management conference. How many in this room even know what a management conference is? Well, I'm impressed because I had no idea what that was, but now I do. This is the structure of our management conference. Hold on, this skipped a slide. I'm not sure why. Give me 1 second, because this is an important slide. Okay. There we go. No? Okay, I'm going to do this.
What happens?
Yeah, do you want to do this for me? Because it's not
Sorry.
working.
What happens?
Can you pass on that, please? I'm trying to backspace on this one more, just starting myself. There we go, thank you. This is a management conference. It's made up of all of the different interests of the Mobile area, really of coastal Alabama. It includes federal government, academia, business and industry, and utilities boards, fishermen, place-based grassroots groups, NGOs, local government, and really for us, most importantly, state government. Our management conference is organized a little bit differently from what you're going to hear Holly talk about. When I first came to the program, my boss at the time said, I need help. We need to restructure this management conference because the way that it was traditionally established is not working in the state of Alabama. We're talking out to people. They're not communicating. They're not participating in this management conference. So through a year-long strategic planning and value identification process, we came up with this structure focused on bringing different constituency groups together to talk amongst themselves, because we identified that, in particular, locally elected officials did not want to say anything in front of NGOs, for example. So now what we have is a series of subcommittees that feed into an executive committee. We have a government networks committee, which is locally elected officials, and then people come down from Montgomery, state agency leads, and they share amongst themselves. We have a business resources committee, where we reach out to the private sector. We have a citizen action committee, which is the nexus of all of our grassroots, place-based volunteer organizations, and that's where citizens feed into the process. We have a project implementation committee, which historically was more your environmental compliance agencies, Fish and Wildlife Service, the state, environmental management. But as I talk about how we're doing our work now, there are engineers in this room that have probably been at project implementation committee meetings. We're getting a lot of engineers coming to those. We have a science advisory committee, and that really is the nucleus of the whole management conference. It guides us in what we should be focusing on. And then and we have a finance committee that helps determine how much money they think we can raise locally and at the state level. And we have an executive committee that really is the one guiding, governing, voting body of our management conference. The rest all make recommendations to the executive committee, and then the executive committee is the final say on our work plan, how we do things, policies, whether we should respond to a letter or not. Our science advisory committee, as I told you, that was the nucleus. They are the ones that investigate the stressors. What are the stressors in our coastal area, and where are they most acute? Our project implementation committee, they really are focused on how do we get this work done on the ground. I always call them my shovel in the ground people. Our business resources committee really has been established to develop networks within the private sector. You've heard a lot about leveraging this morning, and really identifying influencers within the community, both locally and at the state level, frankly at the federal level when you bring in elected officials. Our community action groups, our community action committee is really getting on the ground. And we're talking about, really Wolf Bay Watershed Lodge or Dog River Clean Water Revival. They're very focused, they have a very small geographic focus, and they are typically the ones that we would go to for monitoring, although I know Rick is coming to our community in a couple of weeks to shift that a little bit. We're real excited about that. Our government networks really is looking at issues, regulations. A big thing for them right now is how do we establish the governing ability or authority to be able to manage the stressors or impacts that cause the degradation in the first place. If we can't do that, then we're going to be putting a lot of money on the ground for naught. Our focus areas, largely dictated by EPA, this is how we have to report to them, is looking at ecosystem status and trends. The Science Advisory Committee works a lot on those issues. What research needs to be conducted? What questions should we be asking? How are we getting our monitoring done, both at the project scale as well as system-wide? And then how are we reporting that information out to the public in a way that they can easily digest whether or not our estuaries are healthy or not? Ecosystem restoration and protection is not only focused on water quality, it's also focused on key populations of living resources, fish and wildlife both. It's looking at habitats, a mosaic of habitats across our 2 coastal counties, and it's also looking at healthy communities. And when I say healthy communities, I'm really focused on resiliency, although in recent months, the issue of environmental health or public health related to our environmental conditions is starting to come up, and that's going to be new for us if we decide to go in that direction. Technical assistance and capacity building, that's building tools. We have a habitats tool that tells people where the priority habitats are. We have land use, land cover tools. We train, we do volunteer water quality monitoring training. We have incentives programs, or we're trying to develop incentive programs, I should say. And in some cases, but rarely, we will provide some direct assistance to a nonprofit group. And then community awareness, education, involvement, community awareness campaigns, brochures, huggers, all that kind of stuff. But also outreach and public involvement and educating at that very local level what the issues are that we're trying to address. The issue in Alabama, first of all, I need to say that Alabama is not Florida. We don't have water management districts. We don't have support for environmental protection. So we're really working from the ground up in coastal Alabama. There's also a very big disconnect between Montgomery and the coast. So we have a lot of landowners directing the state, and we have a lot of needs on the coast that don't resonate with who's governing the state of Alabama. We're working on that, though. Since 1994, over a third of our main Mobile Bay estuary habitat has been converted from natural to developed land, causing flooding, polluted runoff, channel erosion, sediment deposits, decreased aesthetics and property values. Really, for us, our biggest issue is stormwater runoff. It has impacted our submerged aquatic vegetation, but more so, it's affecting our water quality and our habitats and our living resources, frankly, in our coastal watersheds. So we're looking at watersheds from the headwaters to the intertidal marshes and flats along our coast in those intertidal watersheds. The large Mobile Bay watershed covers 3/4 of the state of Alabama. It is the 4th largest by volume in the continental U.S., and it's also the 6th largest in area. We only focus, however, on the right-hand side on the 2 coastal counties. When I first came here, we were looking solely at the blue around the bay and the yellow on top of that. We have now expanded our target area to be all of Mobile and Baldwin counties because we found that the stakeholders we were working with had larger service areas than just those small 2 watersheds. So we're not only dealing with Mobile Bay anymore, we're also looking at Perdido Bay, which is a unique situation because part of it's in Florida. And we're also looking at Mississippi Sound and Bayou Labattery and Grand Bay on the west side. So base funding for the program. You've asked some really good questions about how you sustain a mobile or an estuary program. Right now, our base funding for operations and program implementation, so I'm not talking about restoration or even watershed planning, I'm just talking about outreach, education, maybe some capacity building. Most of it is EPA. Most of it is our base grant. It's 69% of what we bring in to fund our operations. We also receive 20% from the state, and then we receive funding in bits and spurts from some of our local municipalities. When the program was first started and they went out to municipalities, to request match support or funding to support the program, because they all committed to that when we put in the application to become an estuary program, somehow it got couched in with all of the social service requests. So it became a community contribution as opposed to a line item in a local governmental budget. And that has been a thorn in my side since I've been here, trying to get out. You know, you cannot compete. The environment, I'm sorry, is not going to compete with the poor residents, arts, education. It just isn't going to do it. Right? It's hard for me to argue you should be giving us money to support our operations when you know that there are people that are homeless, hungry, not housed, whatever. So that is something that we have really struggled with, because having set that precedent way back in 1995, it's been a hard, 1995, that's 20 years that they've been expecting us to come in, and our budgets have been cut significantly at the local level because of that. We are working on that to try to get into lodging taxes or some other funding stream that comes through these municipalities. So in a nutshell, the question for us has been, how do we balance investments in environmental health with investments in economies that profit from that? Because I would go to all of these local governments to say, would you please give me $2,000 to support our program? No, we're going to cut you to $900, which is probably cost me more to go there and ask for it. The chambers of commerce barely had to ask, and they'd be getting $100,000 from this community, $50,000 from that community, and it was just so skewed that being 100% Italian, 50% Sicilian, really made me mad. And we hold grudges, so I'm really working on that one too, because I've gotten to know these elected officials. They know a lot of Italian too. So back in 2009, we had looked at our first comprehensive conservation management plan, which was adopted in 2002. And really, we had done all that we could with that plan. And we realized we really needed to take a step back. In fact, stormwater management wasn't even called out specifically in that first plan. It was water quality, living resources, habitat management, human uses, outreach and education. Guess who defined those 5 categories? And it was very structured how they wanted that first CCNP to be developed. We had a lot more leeway in this second round, and we took it. And we started by going out and doing a lot of community engagement. We did a survey by zip code across both coastal counties. It was random. When they hit 500, they moved on to another coastal county. They moved on to another zip code. I'm sorry, when they hit 100 per zip code. And what we found from that survey, plus an Auburn University study of where people fished and where the hot places were and the cold places were, and then doing targeted community meetings with Rotary clubs, Kiwanis clubs, garden clubs. We did a couple of church clubs. We just sort of sprinkled those out across both counties. We put all that information together, compiled it, categorized it, and we came out with what people value most about living in coastal Alabama. We wanted this second CCNP to resonate with people. So we wanted to be able to, whatever was in that CCNP, we wanted to be able to tie it back to, climate change matters because it affects those coastlines that you love so dearly. We wanted to be able to tie it back to one of those 6 values. So through our CCNP, these icons show up all over the place. This action connects to fish or heritage and culture. Through this process, something new came to the table that I think is going to help us a lot. And that is heritage and culture. You didn't hear me say heritage and culture was not one of those 5 areas. It mattered. What we heard over and over again when we went out and did this citizen engagement was that stream I can walk across. I used to fish in it as a little kid, and I really want to have that. I want my grandchildren to fish in that stream like I did, and they're not going to be able to do that, and that's why I care. So again, heritage and culture is huge. People in Alabama, water is their life. And we have a very, Florida's big, it's all coastline. Alabama is a very short, small coastline, and people have lived there for a long time. So, we first went to, while we were doing all this community engagement, we went to the Science Advisory Committee and said, help us figure out where the stresses are most acute. They went through this long, involved process of looking at 10 different habitat types, 11 different ecosystem services provided by those habitat types, and 13 different stressors. And the question that was asked to over 30 scientists was, to what extent does this stressor affect that habitat's ability to provide that ecosystem service? It was a spreadsheet of over 1,000 cells. They had to rate each one 0 through 3, 3 most stress, 0 no stress, blank if I don't know. And then we compiled all that, looked at where our gaps were, and went back out to the scientific community and identified specific expertise that could address those gaps. And at the end of the day, not surprisingly, the habitats that were most under stress in the 2 coastal counties were freshwater wetlands, intertidal marshes, I should say, freshwater wetlands, streams, rivers, and riparian buffers, and intertidal marshes and flats. And so what you have there is headwaters, streams, and then what happens at the end of that watershed. The ecosystem services most stressed, nesting, biodiversity, wildlife, fisheries, and of course water quality and fish. The top stress impacts, not surprisingly, all related to land use change, and at the end of the day, they all resonated with one of those things people valued. We then looked at our watersheds, and we evaluated them. I'm going to show you, this is, yep. Another slide is hidden, so I'm not even going to bother to dig it out because you saw what happened last time. But basically, we looked at every single one of these watersheds on this list. These are all HUC 12, so it's a very small drainage basin area, but it's a very local drainage basin area, and that's what we wanted to focus on, local. And they evaluated them on 17 different criteria, from does it have a TMDL, does it have an impaired water body, where are the ADEM long-term monitoring stations, are there NPDES permits in that watershed, has it been identified previously as a priority conservation or restoration watershed, and on and on and on. And when that evaluation was complete, and that was run through our project implementation committee, the shovel in the ground people, and they had one meeting where we had maps, one map after another, and we showed that it was a public meeting. There were about 60 people that came, and they had the clickers. So we would present each watershed. We would talk about what the issues were or what the resources were or needs were in that particular watershed, and we asked them on a scale of 1 to 5, should this be a priority watershed or not? They clicked through it, and this is the list that we came out with. The blue ones were the top ones, and if you look on the right-hand side, restoration, 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 conservation, but that's Big Creek Lake, that's the water source for the city of Mobile, so of course they want to protect that, and some of that is, it's 2 different HUC 12s, and one of those HUC 12s is a very pristine HUC, so that's why it's both. Restoration, restoration, intertidal priority, urban restoration, and we had to get down to Grand Bay Swamp before we got to a true conservation watershed, which was interesting and a little bit counterintuitive for me because you always hear it's a lot more money to restore a watershed than it is to conserve a watershed. And I would have expected a little bit more balance there, but we didn't get it, which threw us into urban watershed restoration, which is a whole other story I'm not going to talk about. So, at the end of the day, these were the watersheds that were either a conservation priority, a restoration priority from a process done back in 2008, or one of those intertidal watersheds or watershed complexes. Because if you look at On the right-hand side, there's 3 green ones in a row. That's Fish River. It's actually 3 Huck, it's actually 4 Huck 12s, but it's not showing up here. What we did, what this map shows is how those watershed plans are being funded. The first watershed that we worked on was the Doleve watershed, which is that little blue one in the upper right-hand corner. The Doleve watershed, I have a case study to talk to you more about it, but we started that watershed management plan in 2009 because it was depositing so much sediment in the river. By 2010, the oil had started flowing. We were, right when they tapped the well was about the time that we finished that watershed plan. We didn't do that watershed plan for restore money. We did that watershed plan for ae9c money because that was a source of funding that was available to us to be able to do some restoration, and we knew we had a lot to do. Because we had a comprehensive watershed management plan in place, and that first one cost us $125,000. I am not talking, and that does not have modeling involved in it. It was walking the tributaries, rating all of the different streams, identifying where the erosion was, and whatnot. That landed us the biggest ae9c grant. Having that comprehensive watershed management plan in place landed us the largest 319 grant that the state of Alabama had ever given out. So there was a lot of pressure on us to get that one right. And we had the director of the Department of Environmental Management coming down often to see how we were doing. However, in the end, we had a successful restoration project, which I'll tell you about in a minute, which catapulted us into NIFWIF funding. And that's where the leverage comes in. Because we were able to demonstrate a clear process of, I didn't even mention, we did a sediment analysis using the Geological Survey of Alabama, which drove a watershed management planning process for that Huck 12, which drove a restoration project, and which also, by the way, drove changes in subdivision regulations and increases in buffer areas for our waterways in that particular watershed. It's a lot more stringent to do. The requirements of doing business in that watershed, if you want to build something, are a lot more stringent today because of that watershed management plan. NIFWIF looked at that when the first round of NIFWIF money came out from the Gulf Environmental Benefit Fund. We had lots of projects identified just in that one watershed, not having anticipated that we'd ever have any money to do any of it, frankly. And when the state of Alabama came to us and said, do you have any projects? What do you have? I forgot to mention that the state of Alabama's Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, their commissioner, is our executive committee co-chair. So he had been well versed in what we were doing through the several meetings that we had had. We had them quarterly. And we said, yeah, we have projects here. How many do you want? And at the time, you heard a lot of landscape scale restoration. Everybody was talking about it has to be landscape scale restoration. So we were a little cocky and said, oh yeah, we'll give them landscape scale restoration. We'll just give them, we'll stop the bleeding in Doleve watershed and we'll give them these 3 major tributaries that have a lot of work that needs to be done. Yeah, we got the money. And we're working on that now, and it hasn't been easy. It wasn't easy to sell the whole concept of watershed to NIFWIF. We had to fill rooms with experts from the Geological Survey, from the Department of Environmental Management, environmental consultants that have been working in that area since the 1980s, the Dolphin Island Sea Lab, their scientists. Finally, we got NIFWIF to agree that, yes, we're willing to spend our money further up into the watershed than the first 1,000 feet, because they're very focused on where's the nexus to the injured resources. They're all about that Treasury decree or whatever you call it.
Florida was right there with you. We had the same issue. Same water quality.
But they get it now, so that's a good thing. So, oh, there it is. Okay, so this is the map that we had everybody vote on, basically. And they'd look at these maps and say, oh, the red is where urbanization is, and whatever. I'm not going to go there because we've already talked about that. So, it took us a little bit of time. Doleve was a special case, but we had to go out to these communities and explain what a watershed was. Most of them didn't even know what a watershed was. So this was one of the slides that I would always talk to them about. Okay, a watershed is really a basin. Most of these watersheds cut across geopolitical boundaries. So we're not just dealing with one community. We're dealing usually with at least 2 communities in a county, some of which don't like each other. That's a whole nother story. But we did want to address the problem. We didn't want to go at doing these restoration projects piecemeal, so we thought it was worth the investment to educate our communities on what a watershed was. This was another example of slides that I would show them, and it was always, it's the partnerships with others. To me, that's the most important part of watershed planning and implementation, are those partnerships, are those leveraging opportunities. We know there's a lot of restore money out there, but that's not what this is all about. This is about long-term management of these watersheds to be the healthiest as possible Alabama coast that we can. What do these watershed management plans include? Well, we start with EPA's 9 key elements, and they require building partnerships at the head of the stack for EPA as well. Characterizing the watershed. For us, characterizing the watershed wasn't just identifying pollutant loads, where there were areas of erosion or stream degradation or pathogen pollution or sanitary sewer overflows. It was, how is climate change going to affect this watershed? You need to do some stormwater or some sea level rise modeling and some storm surge modeling within each of these comprehensive watershed plans. And then how does each one of these watersheds address the 6 values, the 6 things that people care about living in coastal Alabama? Where are the access points? Where can we expand access points? What are the heritage and cultural values of that particular watershed? How can we use those festivals or whatnot as educational opportunities about the watershed and how it relates back to that? Setting goals and identifying solutions. These watershed planning processes take a long time. They're a year-long process. There's a lot of community engagement. They get involved in setting the goals and solutions. And then designing the implementation program, the monitoring plan, and the adaptive management plan and how we need to shift. And I will tell you that in the watershed planning that we've done so far, Doleave Watershed, the driver of that, was a resident that lived, there's a lake, amenity lake in that watershed that was acting as a sediment trap. They could not bring their boats into that lake. And they wanted that lake dredged. And he was determined to get that, if it meant doing a watershed management plan, do it, but I want that lake dredged. By the end of that watershed management planning process, it's the last thing on the list. And he stopped calling on the lake being dredged. He recognized that before we do that, we have to do all this other stuff, or it's going to be a waste of time. We have another watershed plan that we're doing right now, and it's in the Fowl River watershed. There are this series of small little islands that go through it. The person that was the driver for that wanted those islands restored. That watershed plan has not been completed yet. It should be done by the end of September. But he finally, at the last steering committee meeting, said, I don't really care about those islands anymore. We really need to protect these wetlands. So it's interesting to see how they come into the process with a certain set of perceptions, but through the tedious process of going through the characterization, learning about the watershed, learning about the sediment dynamics and the sediment transport within the system. Sediment's a big issue for us. They evolve over time, and to me, that's been really rewarding. The difference between these watershed plans, I actually, my background's community development, and I'd go to DC, I worked with HUD, and I saw this bumper sticker one time, and I thought, that's it. Planners don't do it. And then I get this job, and it seems like all I ever do is plan. It's very frustrating. But a comprehensive conservation management plan is like a framework of what we want to achieve on a 30,000-foot scale. The watershed plan is really divided into the bites that you have to take as an elephant to get to that higher idea. The Doleave case study, this is what it looked like in 1974. There wasn't a whole lot. Red is urbanization. By 2008, you can see the urbanization in a watershed with steep slopes and highly erodible soils, and in an area where we get, on average, 5 feet of rain, and it's hard rain, big drops, very erosive drops of rain. That's what it did to the bay. That's what it was doing to the bay. That area was home to the largest subdivision in Alabama in 1974, Lake Forest subdivision, in that area, and what I just told you about, highly erodible soils and whatnot. The stakeholders for that project, there's the long list. I'm not going to go through it, but it included private sector, public sector, governments, NRCS, Fish and Wildlife Service, the Corps. Everybody was at the table. Everybody wanted to fix this watershed. we started with a baseline. We knew that the goal of this watershed management planning process was to get the impaired water bodies in this watershed off of ae9c's 303D list. That was the outcome that we wanted at the end of all this. And so we knew that we needed to have a respectable entity doing the monitoring, doing the measurements of where the pollutant loads were and how we were reducing them. We engaged in a partnership with the Geological Survey of Alabama because we knew that the Department of Environmental Management would accept that data. It was appropriately quality controlled. That's a big issue at the state level when you're trying to get something off of an impaired list. So we went with them. We did the plan. Then we literally sat down at a table and started drawing all over this one area where we knew that we had the most problems. This is one of the maps that was produced in that plan. And that first project, the circle in the upper left-hand corner of that map, there was such severe erosion in that one area that it was compromising. It was on the verge of compromising Highway 31 and Spanish Fort. ALDOT was going to go in there and hard armor it. We went to ALDOT and said, you know what, there's an ADM 319 grant out there. If you give us that $200,000 that you were going to hard armor it with, we might be able to do something a little prettier, with a little bit more ecosystem function to it. Would you be willing to give us money, ALDOT, to match an ADM grant? And ALDOT and ADM do not get along. So that was a long shot, but they said yes. We ended up doing it. That was the restoration of Joe's Branch. We did a stormwater step pool conveyance system. I may not be saying that right, but you get the idea. A series of step pools. This is what it looked. This is the canyon. If you see those people standing at the bottom of it, it was like a 30-foot drop. There was so much water coming through that small tributary that it looked like a canyon. It was really unbelievable. And each time you would go, you know, another big chunk of that area was mass wasted and not pretty. That's what it looks like today. We're pretty excited about it. So when NIFWIF came along, we showed them that project and said, we know what we're doing. So we got money. Actually, we got $6.781 million. That's how we leveraged the watershed planning process to do restoration, to finish out Joe's Branch, to do Doleave watershed, or the Doleave Creek area, and then the Taiwasi Creek area. Those are the three main tributaries of that watershed, and there was severe erosion in all three of those. Enter the rains of April 2011 or 12, the 400-year storm in Alabama that completely, once we got the funding, blew all of those projects out of the park. Each one of those projects ended up probably twice as much money. And we're still working with NIFWIF today because this was a first round project. It was an experiment, if you will. We brought them out there again to see, they saw it before they funded it, and then we brought them out there after the rains. I keep hearing this thunder. And they got the message, and they are, with the state of Alabama, willing to put the money into it to correct these severely eroded streams. And with the Doleave area, we're actually having to work with ALDOT again because there was another rain that severely eroded that particular segment, and ALDOT again had to come in, and it was a question of hard armoring versus something a little bit more environmentally appropriate. All three of those restorations are ongoing right now. Another reason why watershed planning was good, and we used this as a selling point with some of our communities, was the National Flood Insurance Program. And the points you get for becoming a community rating system, I don't know if you're familiar with that, I'm not going to go into it, but if your community has a community rating system rating, it can provide some discounts in flood insurance in those communities. Not many of our communities are part of that program, and we're really trying to get those communities to become part of that program because it does provide some discount for insurance purposes. So what is the return on investment? Remember this slide I showed you before? It was all EPA money. Well, now, with the NIFWIF funding that has come into us, not only did we get the $6.7 million for the restoration of the Doleave watershed, at the same time when we gave them that project, they said, can you give us a counterpart in Mobile County, because we have to really pay attention to balance among the two coastal counties. We said, yes, we have a conservation watershed over here. It's the Fall River watershed. However, at the mouth of the Fall River, we have a severely eroded tip of Monolith Island? Could we do a restoration project to stabilize the tip, do some living shorelines technology, create some wetlands, and while we're doing that, we can do the watershed management plan at the same time? They said yes. So that first round, we got the 6.7, and it was about $2 million for Foul River watershed. We followed that up with NIFWIT, like in the watershed management concept now. We went back to them and asked them to fund 7 more watershed management plans. They said yes. We received another grant for that. And now the state of Alabama has put in as one of their 5 projects, but I didn't see it on their slide, so I guess it's under planning and monitoring, to do the 19 other watersheds from the Florida line to the Mississippi line, all of the intertidal watersheds, because the state said NIFWI's not going to fund any more watersheds, so let's get them all done. Let's get all these watershed plans done. The watershed plans typically cost about $250,000. We knew that because the first watershed management planning firm gave us documented an additional $125,000 over and above what we paid them and documented pro bono services. They wanted that project that much. So they're not all 250. There are a couple of factors that determine what the cost is, but they're expensive. But they pay off in the long run. So the challenges for us in sustaining the Mobile Bay National Estuary Program, there's a couple of them. Financial commitment from local governments and a tight budget climate. I don't know if you have that same problem, but it's a big one. It's a big one. Another one is sustaining financial commitment from the state through multiple administrations. The administration that we're in now is very supportive of what we're doing on the coast. The administration before that wasn't really. That governor was from, well, both governors were from the Tuscaloosa area, but the second governor, because of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, had a crisis learning experience of the value of the coast. So he is much more supportive of what we're doing. We don't know what's going to happen. He's in his second term. He's leaving. Who knows what we're going to get for another governor and whether he'll be, or she will be, supportive of what we're doing. Another challenge was positioning our organization within the community. There's a lot of confusion between what our waterkeeper organization does and what we do. All of these NGOs are a part of the management conference. They're all really pushing the common agenda forward. There's confusion, though, between what we are and what they are, and that's really a challenge in the community to differentiate yourself from the others. And then building trust over time through relationships and results. We have to keep showing results of what we're doing and really publicizing that, and building trust with the private sector in particular to get them to see that it's okay to be a conservationist, we've learned recently. We don't call ourselves environmentalists anymore in Alabama. We are conservationists, because if you're an environmentalist in Alabama, you are a tree hugger, you are a Democrat, and they don't want anything to do with you. So those are really the big challenges that we face. And I leave you with this quote that, going back to my high school years, that's pretty pathetic, but this was in my high school book. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. It's a worthy endeavor to create a process for bringing all of the different stakeholders that care about protecting your coast together and to identify those common goals and then go after them. Don't do it because of restore money, though. Do it for the long-term proposition of changing how you manage your coastal assets and figuring out how you cobble together a variety of sources of funding and other resources. It doesn't always have to be money to get the job done. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Roberta. So, questions?
Have you considered adopting a southern drawl? Would that maybe help your efficiencies?
I forgot to tell you I'm from Massachusetts living in Alabama. No, I have not. Although if I go up there, you tell me I have one.
The buy-in from the local government in dollars can be very difficult, particularly the last 5 or 6 years, and as well as at least in my, I'm from Bay County, and we've got very conservative commissioners, and they don't like meetings, they don't like plans. They like to have things done. They want to know their money goes in and it's going to have things done, not just a report being written. And so I think what you said last as far as being able to show results is going to be key. And particularly in the early stages, that can be difficult, but that also can play back into some of the things that John and Bob were talking about as far as external money and be able to bring that in. So if you have a program that's being established and they see that it has the capability to bring in external money early in the process and also be able to do like pilot projects, I think that's critical to getting the local acceptance of a program. And so I would encourage, I know that the NEPs are strapped, but the talk about thinking in terms of long-term restore monies, some could be local, some could be from the council, as being supporting of these organizations, makes a lot of sense. And the fact that they are locally driven programs is really important and would be very appealing, at least to my commission, to where they realize that our county with the neighboring counties are the ones that discuss what's important and identify products to be needed. I think it makes it more acceptable for that as well. So, thanks.
Any other questions?
Yeah, Paul Johnson of the College of Environment. I've become fairly familiar with your program over the last couple of years and extremely impressed with the progress you've made. I went to school on Dolphin Island and spent a lot of great years in Mobile Bay. And the challenges you have were unbelievable of having such a large estuary program of all of Mobile Bay, and then to systematically cover the number of watersheds you have is just amazing. I just wanted to compliment you on the progress I've seen over the last 30 years.
I think you've been at a PIC meeting too.
Yeah, I show up at a lot of meetings. But I guess my question is, you probably have geographically one of the larger NEPs. I know you mentioned Pamlico Sound in North Carolina, but Mobile Bay is huge. Could you add some advice to what we're doing here with the series of watersheds stretching from the Perdido River system over to my county, Wakulla County, over into that neck of the woods? There's eight individual estuarine watershed systems within that panhandle area. What kind of advice could you give us sitting here in this room of how to maybe approach that with this new paradigm we're looking at, taking the N out of the estuary programs?
You know, we started, the focus was on Mobile Bay. One of the reasons why we expanded out to include Perdido Bay and then Mississippi Sound watersheds was there were some very conservative communities that anything that had Mobile in it, they didn't want anything to do with. And we talked about changing our name. We thought, that doesn't work. In the end, you may consider, depending, I don't know personalities of the different communities across that stretch, but if there are there certainly are commonalities just by virtue of where you're all located. But if you can find a common thread that can pull you all together, what you're dealing with in one estuary, there's going to be a lot of common issues. And to the extent that you can leverage amongst each other and have an economy of scale to look across the whole stretch and do one program that could cover all. Again, I don't know enough about the area to say do it or not, but if there are like-minded people that you all want to get something done, why not come together and do it? You're still, you know, we are a whole management conference. We're working with organizations beyond Mobile and Baldwin County. We have county commissioners coming to our government networks committees now. We don't spend any money. It's always a concern of, you know, splitting up the resources even further. But a lot of it isn't about resources. A lot of it is about networking. A lot of it is about technology transfer, what one group is doing versus another group. There's a lot of information that comes out of the process as a whole that is valuable, I think, across watersheds and probably across estuaries as well. That's what I would say. Something you just really need to evaluate.
I'm interested in sort of from the marketing end, how you all, perhaps use the heritage culture angle to reach people versus, sort of the water quality science or.
We use grandfathers and grandsons and PSAs. We just talk about it a lot. Your legacy. This is your legacy. In meetings, we always recognize when people mention that it's an important aspect of it. And we really, one of the things that we've been doing, two things. We all talk watersheds right now because we recognize from our NIFWIF experience, if we want to spend this money further up into the watershed than your literal intertidal area, you have to talk watershed. You have to drive home the point that the headwaters matter, basically. So the other issue is we are water. We are water in coastal Alabama. It goes back centuries. They all have, there's a lot of people that never left coastal Alabama, and they are at these meetings. They care. It sells itself. We don't even really have to say anything. They say it for us. But we do in our marketing, when we talk about creating a clean water future, it's the future like the past. When we talk about trash, the way it used to be, we can get back there. We always try to pull it in, whether it's subtly or directly.
Thanks.
Any other questions? I just want to follow up on the issue of the water quality thing, because we had the same exact problem, and I was in a meeting with Phil when we were trying to figure out why NIFWIF wasn't choosing any of our projects, which were water quality projects. And I certainly, we went there, we talked to Michael Sharp, Tom Kelch, went to Washington, talked to him and said, you don't understand, you gotta, unless we get the water right, we're never gonna get the habitat right. So we hope there will be, that was a little discouraging if they're not gonna be spending, we think they should be spending other money in watershed, are these projects that help water quality, because we certainly agree with you, and I think more of us, that's that interconnection and that strength across states. If more of us are telling the same story, because that's one of the things we found at NACO is getting together, the National Association of Counties, getting together counties in Alabama and Mississippi and Florida. We all of a sudden realized we have more in common with especially Alabama, Mississippi. We're like, we got more in common with you than we do with the remainder of the rest of our state. And so we said, absolutely, we're fighting a lot of the same challenges.
We are, and I have to give a shout out to our state lands director, because she would not take no for an answer. And we were going to get in that room with Tom Kelch and John Porthouse and Mike Sharp until they said yes. There is, I don't know if you sense the tension between the states and NIFWIF. NIFWIF thinks we just have to consult the states. The states think this is our money. You only do the projects that we want you to do. And there's, we've been kind of going back and forth with that on NIFWIF. We probably will continue to, but we've
been there right with you. I've gone to DC and sat in the meeting in the conference room with Tom and said, there's no way you're going to get habitat unless you get water quality done. You got to do more water quality projects.
Yeah, it's been a learning curve, but I really feel like they're there with us now, and they are doing the watershed planning, and they're looking for the watershed plans before they're funding restoration. So that's a step in the right direction. So thank you for your part in that.
Any other questions? Okay, so we're going to adaptively manage now, since we're at noon, a little after noon. I've asked if Holly and Commissioner Justice could actually do their presentation while y'all eat, and they have graciously said yes. So as you know, TNC is a science-based organization, and we ran an extensive algorithm to determine what everybody would want to eat for lunch. And so there are lunches in that little room, and if y'all could go in there, pick your lunch, there's drinks, come back to your school. If you need to use any facilities in the meantime, let's take about 10 minutes to take care of that business, grab your lunch, come back, and then we'll have the what do you call that? The cleanup hitters. So thank you very much.
Sorry, I was late getting over here. So yes, just in drive home this morning, so we had a couple things to take care of. Glad to be here.
I didn't even want to bring that one up because I got a call from Chris, and I sent an email tonight saying, okay, can you please tell me how you're going to reach out to us? content on the bottom. So I've been
think, okay, what are the pictures we're going to run through? No, we're good. Okay, so do you want to y'all move the computer, and that way you'll have this here.
Hello? Okay.
Testing.
So we're going to start back up. Appreciate y'all doing that. And with that, Holly Greening from Tampa Bay National Estuary Program. Thank you.
This is on. Okay, great, good. Well, this is truly a working lunch, so thank you all for sticking around and listening to and talking with us about some of the background from the Tampa Bay Estuary Program. Roberta did a great job with explaining some of the nitty-gritty of how our programs work in terms of the watershed management plans. I'm going to step back just a little bit from that and talk about some of the key elements of starting up an estuary program, a watershed management program. I have been with the Tampa Bay Estuary Program since its inception in 1990. I was the senior scientist for 17 years and then became the executive director in 2008. So I've been here for the full length and can talk a little bit about what some of the key elements were early on in the process and also some of the hurdles. And we're very, very glad to have Commissioner Charlie Justice with us today from Pinellas County. He's our policy board co-chair, and I know you'll have questions for him also from his point of view as a policy board member and also as a funding entity of the Tampa Bay Estuary Program. Just as a little bit of background, this was Tampa Bay in the 1970s. You don't want any of your bays to ever get this bad. It was considered dead. It was covered with algae. We had lost more than 50% of our underwater seagrasses because the algae was just blocking the light. It was truly a poster child for nutrient pollution in the 1970s. And so I think that crisis really kick-started what people considered to be a very long recovery of Tampa Bay and the importance of a watershed management plan associated with that recovery. Restoring Tampa Bay started off really with citizen action. The citizens in the Tampa Bay area were called for action, legislative action from the state to help curb some of the pollution from our wastewater treatment plants. That happened in the early 1980s. We do have state legislation. It's only for the Tampa Bay area. Now has been extended to some of the other areas, but it was initiated initially in Tampa Bay to require our wastewater treatment plants at that time to reduce their nitrogen load by more than 90%, within just a couple of years. And they were able to comply with that because at that time there was Clean Water Act money and there were other sources of funding at that time. But our wastewater treatment plants did clean up either by implementing advanced wastewater treatment, which reduced, again, their nitrogen by about 90%, or by implementing reuse within the watershed, and several of our communities did that. We also have a water management district swim plan that was really initiated in the late 1980s. And then in 1990, the Tampa Bay Estuary Program was formed. Our partners include the 3 counties around Tampa Bay, the 3 cities within Tampa Bay, EPA, the Department of Environmental Protection, and our water management district. So we have a really good mix of both regulated entities in terms of our cities and counties, as well as the regulators, which are the Water Management District, the EPA, and DEP. This has been a very, very strong supporting entity from the very beginning, and in fact, all of our local partners do contribute funds to the program based on the population within the watershed. So the smaller cities contribute a smaller amount than the larger counties do. Just a little bit about our structure, and I know Roberta talked a little bit about Mobile-based structure, quite different than ours. Ours is a typical National Estuary Program structure. We have a technical advisory committee and a community advisory committee. Because of the specific requirements for sunshine in the state of Florida, both our technical advisory committee and our community advisory committee make recommendations to me as the TVEP staff rather than directly to our management and policy board, which both sit in the sunshine. And so this allows our technical advisory committee and our community advisory committee to work among themselves, which would not be possible if they were a sunshine body. So that's been a really important sort of boots on the ground consideration when you're considering different structures. Having your technical folks and your community folks report and make recommendations to staff, and staff in turns makes recommendations to the bodies in sunshine has been a very important piece there. Our management board consists of high-level environmental managers at our cities and counties and the regulatory agencies. Our policy board consists of elected officials from our 3 counties and 3 cities, and then the leads of, for instance, we have the DEP regional director that sits on our policy board, and a governing board member of the Water Management District that sits on the policy board. Just to sort of talk a little bit about some of the early key elements that seem to work very well for our program. A resolution to participate was an important first step among all of our partners, and this was really that the parties sign on to collaborate and act in good faith. They agreed to identify goals. They didn't identify what those goals were, but they agreed let's identify specific measurable goals. Agreed to contribute funds and or in kind to support technical work, and agreed to stay science-based. So this was really somewhat of a charter. We did not call it a charter, but it really laid out what the management and the policy board members agreed to do at the very beginning. This was an important document for us as we entered into the formation of a management plan long term. Oh, and John touched a little bit on this, choosing an entity type. This is another important consideration. There are a number of different things that, different types of entities that a watershed management group like an estuary program can consider. Hosting within an existing government structure like a local government, an agency, a regional planning council. Some of the pros for that are the existing infrastructure and the support is already in place. There's a possibility of using some of the existing staff if you do choose a host that is already an existing entity. Some of the drawbacks may be that the staff is subject to some of the host requirements, such as restriction on travel, which has happened in some of our estuary programs that have hosts that their travel is restricted. So they cannot attend some of the required national meetings that we do. Purchasing requirements, that sort of thing. And I think one of the things that John pointed out, the entity may not be viewed as independent of the host entity, and I think that's an important piece. Another potential structure, and several of the NEPs around the country are NGOs. They are separate and independent NGOs. Requires a startup formation. There's a need to provide certainly the support structure there within the NGO. It is independent. One of the things that we have found when we examine different structures in Tampa Bay is that a new NGO may be viewed as competition for existing NGOs. And so, it depends on your situation, but that was something that did occur in Tampa Bay when we looked at different structures. It can include both public and private sectors, which I think is a positive piece there. Specifically for the state of Florida, there's a third type of entity that 3 of the 4 NEPs now have adopted, and that is becoming an independent special district of the state of Florida. This is pursuant to the state of Florida Statute 189. Several of the regional planning councils have the same sort of structure. So it requires an interlocal agreement among the public entities and funding commitments. It is public sector only. Private sector parties cannot be part of an independent special district, although that doesn't preclude private entities from participating in the management structure itself. Certainly is independent, and there's a need to provide support structure. Just sort of a little bit of background on some of these considerations. All 4 of the existing national estuary programs in the state of Florida started off with a host entity. And it was because of the existing infrastructure and support needs that we did not have at the very beginning. We all 4 started off as being within a local government, water management district, or a regional planning council. 3 of the 4 now have decided that becoming, and this is a decision of the management and the policy board, it's not a staff decision at all, have decided that the need to be viewed as independent and to be your own bosses is a really critical piece, and have moved to now an independent special district. But that, the beginning stages of it, it was very important to have this supporting structure of an existing entity that was already set up. Another set of early key elements is to establish the functions of that entity. Organize and facilitate certainly is a very big part of that. Manage finances. It needs to be able to manage grants and be very have the infrastructure in place to be able to accept grant funds and then to manage them effectively. Be able to write grant applications. That's an awful lot of what our staffs do, and we're very successful at getting grant applications approved. A point of contact for so many of the different entities, and it's great to see everybody in the room here to need that point of contact is an important piece in terms of whatever entity moves forward. Managing the technical contracts and projects is an important element. Prepare annual assessments on progress. We found that really reporting back to the public and back to all of our elected officials in the area has been very an important function of an estuary program. Outreach and education, we've heard about how important that is, and again, that's an important function. And then, again, to report to the stakeholders, agencies, and the public is a critical function of an entity that is working through a watershed management plan process. Certainly an early element that was important, I think, for many of the estuary programs, and obviously has been identified by your groups also, is to synthesize existing information and to identify gaps. What don't we know that's really important that we need to know? status and trends of important natural resources, water quality, pollution sources, and other impacts, in a series of technical public documents usually, and again, just to document the state of the estuary and of the watershed. Document and track ongoing projects and actions. There's a lot of activity going on in your watersheds. Is there a place that someone could look and see all the different things that are going on and the status of those? And then really an important part of this, after you know, what don't you know that you need to know, identify and prioritize critical gaps in information or knowledge needed to make management decisions. We did this toward the beginning of our program, probably in about year 2 of our program, after we had synthesized existing information. We held a 2-day workshop to look at, to share with everyone what the pieces that were out there already, and then to identify what the critical gaps were in terms of managing our estuary and our watershed for the goals that we think are very important for that water body. One of the things I think that has been so important in Tampa Bay is to adopt measurable goals. In Tampa Bay, and many of you know this, restoring seagrass to that observed in 1950 was a goal that our policy board adopted in the 3rd year of the program. And so this was a very early goal, but it was really driven by some surveys that were done of our local population, of what they wanted to Tampa Bay to look like. What did they want from Tampa Bay? And the citizen surveys turned out 3 things. They wanted clear water, they wanted better fishing, and they wanted to be able to swim without algae, without the algae that we saw there in the 1970s. All that pointed to seagrass as a critical habitat there. The clear water is required by seagrass in order to expand. Better fishing, again, very clearly linked to seagrass. And swimming without algae, when you do have the clear water and the seagrass come back, the algae population does not flourish. So it was really important to understand what the citizens wanted, and then to have a living resource goal that was very much associated with those priorities from the citizens. This map on the left-hand side here shows the difference between 1950 and 1990 seagrass coverage. We had lost about 50% of our seagrass, again due to nutrient pollution. We'd lost it throughout the bay, and we had lost it primarily at the deep edges, which indicated that light was the important limiting factor, and have worked through the science in about a 5 or 6 year focus period to identify numeric goals for water clarity that would support seagrass to recover to 1950s levels, and the amount of nitrogen that can come into the bay and maintain that level of water clarity necessary for seagrass. So we now have numeric goals not only for seagrass, our living resource target, but also water clarity. Chlorophyll A is an indication of the amount of algae in the water column, and nitrogen loading. And so we have caps on nitrogen in Tampa Bay now. Another early key element was to invite everyone to participate in a collaborative process to help meet those long-term goals. The public sector the public sector on our policy board realized that they were not going to be able to reach that long-term goal of maintaining water clarity and nutrient loading to support seagrass recovery without inviting our private sector partners to work with us in helping to meet these long-term goals. We do have a public-private partnership called the Tampa Bay Nitrogen Management Consortium, that includes 45 different entities, including local governments, but also our mining industry, which is very big in Tampa Bay, electric utilities, another very big part of our overall nitrogen budget, and other industry. We're quite an industrialized bay. Agriculture is also included in the Tampa Bay Nitrogen Management Consortium. They're represented by the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, and so that is an important part of that. This is the Tampa Bay Nitrogen Management Consortium. The 45 public and private partnerships, partners within this watershed approach have implemented over 500 different projects and actions, everything from wastewater treatment improvement, industrial cleanup, to things like fertilizer ordinances adopted by our local governments that restrict the nitrogen fertilizer in the summer rainy season for us. That's been a very, very important part of our stormwater management process. The consortium developed and agreed to voluntary caps on nitrogen loads at the levels that were observed in 2003. Because in 2003, we were meeting our water quality goals at that time. Caps are now incorporated into permits and are meeting EPA's TMDL and the DEP's environmental regulations also. So the voluntary work of the consortium is now meeting regulatory requirements also. The consortium members think this is a really important element because the consortium partners developed this process and adopted these voluntary caps on their nitrogen loads in lieu of a more traditional TMDL process and or the DEP regulatory process. DEP and EPA were very much engaged and a part of this process, but it was really the consortium, the public and private sectors, that developed the science behind this and then agreed to these long-term goals. We now have permits for all 189 sources within the watershed that the consortium has developed and are being implemented and continue to be implemented throughout the watershed. With all these activities, nitrogen load has decreased significantly. We have seen big reductions in our point sources with the wastewater treatment plants and the industrial discharges, both contributing to that. And our non-point sources are continuing to go down. So our nitrogen load has decreased by about 50% between the 1970s and current levels. Water quality has improved. This is a graphic that we show every year, and it gets a lot of press. It gets a lot of interest from all of our partners. It shows starting in 1974, these are the 4 major bay segments of Tampa Bay, when we were meeting chlorophyll A and water clarity targets and when we were not. You can see starting in 1974 through about 1984, very few times were we actually meeting those targets. I think it's really important to recognize that even with very big actions like the reductions in point sources that occurred in 1980, it still took 5 years before we started seeing the recovery in the bay. So these things don't happen quickly, even with very large actions. Stormwater regulations were enacted in 1985 from the state. The estuary program was formed in 1990, and then the Nitrogen Management Consortium was formed in 1996. You can see the gradual increase in water clarity and meeting water quality goals. This has occurred at the same time that we have 1 million more people in the watershed since 1990. So, I think this really shows the power of collaboration. When people get together, decide, okay, we're going to do this in all the different ways that we can, and even in the face of new development and with a lot more people in the watershed. Very good news just earlier this year that our seagrass goal was met. When we started this in 1990, I thought that our goal may be met by 2020, 2030, and so it is very gratifying to see how quickly the seagrasses are coming back. And again, this is at the same time when we have increased growth in our watershed. So I think a real good message here is that economic development and environmental improvement do not have to be at odds with each other, but it does take a lot of effort and a lot of collaboration. Very recently, we also conducted an economic evaluation of not just what the economy of Tampa Bay was to the region, but how much more did a clean bay mean for our region versus just having the bay there. This is a cover story from the Tampa Bay Business Journal, which is not usually a journal that we get a lot of press in from our environmental elements here, but this was a very important piece to help reach the public and the business community especially, that clean water and a healthy bay has improved the economic viability of the Tampa Bay area very significantly. Overall, one out of every 5 jobs in Tampa Bay watershed is dependent on a healthy bay, not just the bay being there, but the fact that it is now healthy and clear. That relates to about $22 billion within the counties around our area, or about 13% of the economy for all 6. So it's not just about fishing and manatees, and it's about the economy, and that's a really important message. Just sort of a summary here. Some of the collaborative management strategy elements I think that have been really important. The target resources, and this has been so critical to our program, is to identify what you want your bays to look like or your watersheds to look like. Those resources have been identified by both the public and scientists as worthy indicators. Worthy meaning it takes effort to get there, and we're willing to work together to do that. The community is willing to work together toward common goals. I think the fact that all of you are here is great testimony to the fact that you're ready to do this, and that's certainly a very important element. Science-based numeric goals and targets have been really important. Water quality targets, those living resources that the water quality targets support have been a really important piece. A lot of tools, regulation and early on in our program, public-private collaborative actions, citizen actions, been really important. Long-term monitoring, we would not be able to take a look at where we had been without that monitoring. And I was very, very pleased to hear that there have been monitoring programs here in this area that you can look to where you were and the progress, or where you need to focus on over time. A convener to track, facilitate, and report progress. This is the entity that we're talking about. You really need to have some central feeling that, okay, we can do a lot of things individually, but we can also celebrate all those different things together through an entity. And then assessment and adjustment. We have done a lot of adjustments over time, in terms of as we get information in, okay, well that didn't work that well, let's work this. So I want to turn it over now to Commissioner Charlie Justice. Again, Commissioner Justice is our policy board co-chair. He's been with our program for 4 years?
3 years.
3 years?
We're getting there.
Yeah. And, I think that the perspectives from someone as a policy board member is really important for us to discuss also.
Thank you, Holly. And thank you very much for allowing us to be here today. Thank you, Walton, for hosting us. And I also wanted to thank the Nature Conservancy for facilitating today's meeting. And this is important stuff. I was elected to the County Commission in 2012, and you get assigned different committees, and one of the first ones I got assigned was the Estuary Board. And knew it from my time, but it really wasn't as familiar as I am now as how important the work that they're doing and we're doing now. Prior to getting elected to the county commission, I spent 10 years in the state legislature, and sitting here in Walton County in June instead of Tallahassee, I can't tell you how much I'm very happy to be here and not in Tallahassee today. So I want to cover just kind of three broad topics, and then we can get into the Q&A about how Pinellas sees being part of the estuary program. Pinellas is the most densely populated county in the state of Florida, almost 1 million people in a peninsula on a peninsula. And tourism, the fishing, charter boats, all are a huge part of our economy. And so we see, when you talk about being an environmentalist or being environmentally concerned, it's not just the tree huggers, it's the Chamber of Commerce, it's the fishing industry, it's the charter boat industry, it's the boat building industry, it's the hotels that line our 13 miles of beautiful beaches. Everyone is concerned about it at a different level than other parts of the state. The estuary program has served as kind of a nonpartisan scientific body for us. The policy board or the commissioners, none of us are scientists, but we rely on scientists. And to be able to go and go to the estuary board and say, this is a policy we're considering, what's your view of it? Or to get the policy board's recommendations for policy for the commission to implement. The fertilizer ban was a huge deal in Pinellas County, and it was met with a lot of resistance early on, but now it's something that's, I think, pretty well embraced. But we fight it every year in Tallahassee as the state legislature tries to preempt us from being able to regulate our own fertilizer ordinances. And so when we go to our local legislative delegation and we point to them, we can bring them books of information, and it's not from a traditional environmental group, and it's not even just from the county itself, but it's from this estuary board, which is made up of Republicans and Democrats, Pinellas and Hillsborough County, some of our larger cities, some of our smaller cities. That carries weight. That carries a lot of value to our policymakers in Tallahassee and in Washington. I talked about the estuary board. It is well known in Pinellas, and it crosses the traditional groups. Labor unions to chambers of commerce, our hoteliers, they're familiar with it, and they appreciate the value. The second part I want to talk about is purely dollars. Pinellas County contributes somewhere in the neighborhood of $75,000 a year to be part of the estuary program. In fact, last year we just approved upping our contribution for the next 10 years to be part of this. We see the value of it strictly on inherent, it's good, we get good out of it, but we have been able to, with the policy board, with the estuary board, able to leverage that membership into over $6 million of funding projects over the last 3 years. We're getting over $30 back for every $1 we put in. That's a pretty good return on investment. In fact, just this last week, we got word that we received a $150,000 grant to help with some of our water recirculation projects at our big county park, Fort DeSoto, at the southern tip of the peninsula. Not only did we get the big projects, some of those big dollar projects, but it's also integrated into our entire community. The estuary board has a license plate that we receive funding from every year. Those goes into our small projects, and it can be a project that a city or the county goes after. It can also be a water retention cleanup at a condo association or a neighborhood group. So it's getting into the community. They see the value of being there. I think we've gotten $99,000 in grants for those small dollar grants over the last couple of years in Pinellas. The Be Floridian campaign. This is a campaign put on by the estuary board that reminds people about the fertilizer ordinance, about how to grow Florida-friendly landscaping and planting. Part of the partnerships that we have is they've developed the campaign with marketing people, but then partnering back, the county now wraps some of our vehicles with the Be Floridian logos and things like that. We even had a flamingo project. I don't know if you have these in your area, but we've had different, the turtles or the dolphins that get painted by different artists and groups and put out in the front. We had a flamingo project last year, and so we've had these flock of flamingos traveling around Tampa Bay, reminding people of the Be Floridian and to be smart about what they grow and how they fertilize it. The last part, and the science is incredibly important, and the money is definitely incredibly important, but really, what the estuary board has done is develop relationships across the board. The estuary board and Holly has done an incredible job And I'm glad to encourage you all to take steps forward. I would tell you one of the most important things you can do is make sure that you hire a crackerjack staff, including a wonderful executive director. We've been incredibly blessed with Holly's leadership at the Estuary Board. It will be critical for you because they've got relationships with our municipalities, with our county government, with our state legislative delegation, probably a much better relationship with our congressional delegation than we do as a county. So they in fact, our Republican congressman from our area is one of our leading proponents of funding our estuary program at the national level because they see the value at every step of the way. It's the estuary, as they pointed out, serves as our point of contact. Without hiring extra county staff, we have county staff that do incredible work, but they serve as our point of contact for the restore money and for the restore issues. We work very closely. We have a gentleman, Andy Squires and Kelly Levy, that do our water projects and our beach and our environmental programs. And they're on the phone with your staff every week. How do we work together? Not only on the Restore Act, but it's a partnership now. We have a Lake Seminole project in Pinellas. It's a lake that's probably worse off than Tampa Bay was. And it's a project that we were spending millions and millions of dollars to clean up. But that's money that now the estuary program, because we're a member of that board, the estuary program now uses our contribution as matching funds towards other grants and going out and securing other money. So it all works together to bring even more funds back. But what I want to hit on was the partnership part of it, the relationships that they have with the state and federal, but also it builds wins for the county and the cities. Now, I know in other parts of the state, the counties and cities all work beautifully together, beautiful relationships. It hasn't always been that way in Pinellas County. But I will tell you that some of these projects, and this seagrass hitting that goal and hitting it early and hitting it beyond what we imagined has just been incredible. Not quite lightning playoff victory incredible, but it has been incredible. When I sent out an e-blast on that, I will tell you, I got some feedback from my environmental friends, but the best feedback I got was from my hotel distribution list on the beach. They were excited. They inherently knew that things were getting better, but to see it and to see the statistics, they were thrilled. They were popping the champagne as much as we were. So to build those relationships between the cities and the chambers and the business owners and environmental, this is incredible. And when you can put some of those wins together, you know that means tomorrow we can work together on the next thing even easier and even better. So having that seagrass victory is huge for us and huge for our future, and we're excited to be here to share those successes with you today. Thank you.
I just want to thank all of y'all, and we're going to get into questions, but I just wanted to take this opportunity because I can. Because Bill wants to, but I'm going to do it anyway. This has been incredibly powerful for me, and I think we've got such an opportunity with Restore coming down the train, and there's so many different pots of money and so many planning efforts that the creation of estuary programs, should they be successful, I think is going to be a critical element to our success. And you've heard about bringing people together, all the levels of government, the community, to really focus on our watersheds and getting the science right and getting the priorities right. That's just going to help us make smart decisions. So I just wanted to thank the panel, each and every one of you, so very, very much for sharing your expertise and time with us, and for y'all to be here to ask questions and be part of this. It's just huge. So sorry, I'll get off my soapbox, but I just wanted to take a quick second to thank you. So, questions? Sorry, Tim, ladies first.
I understand.
Hi there, Jessica Kelch from National Wildlife Federation. And Commissioner Justice, I just want to let you know that I'm a former longtime St. Pete resident, and I voted for you a bunch of times. But now I vote for Grover. So anyhow, also I just want to give you guys huge congratulations on the seagrass. That, again, as a former Tampa Bay resident, I was so excited and proud of my community. Holly, I really appreciated your presentation and going over the different entity types and kind of really covering the nuts and bolts of setting one of these things up, because I know I've been thinking about, the people and that do these. I mean, it is a lot of the people that you get, but then the structure and whatnot. And what we saw from the council, that so much time and effort can be spent trying to set up a new entity, and I'm sure those, council partners are kind of grimacing a little bit. But actually, so my question is really directed to Phil and Bob, to say, when you guys put in these proposals to set up these estuary programs, had you given any thought to what structure might be most appropriate? Or are you just figuring, hey, you'll leave it up to them when you get to that point? But again, going back to the lessons we learned about how painful it was to set up the council, it'd be great if there was some thought put into it on the front end, so that way then, if those projects are selected, then they can hit the ground running.
I didn't give any thought to it. Honestly, we really didn't. It was an idea that came from the counties and the TNC. I think EPA has given much more thought.
We have given a lot of thought. However, at the same time, we did not want to predispose the way it may ultimately come out, because the way it works for one estuary is not necessarily going to work for another. You have two structures here that are different. And what works for the stakeholders in those areas, we don't want to predispose what that should be.
Here's one thing that's kind of the same, even though they're different, is that each of these structures, when they set up their management conference, and management conference means all of the structure, that means from the decision-making body through the science component, through the citizens component. The one thing that's the same in these two is that they involve everybody. They work differently, but they all function to feed that information and make decision-making based on all of the stakeholders, all the parties, and based on good science. And that, I think, is fundamental to all of our entities across the nation and certainly the Region 4.
Thanks.
Commissioner Justice and Holly, thanks for your presentation. Congratulations on what seems to be a very successful program. If it was mentioned and I missed it, I apologize, but I don't recall hearing anything about septic tanks in your presentation. Do you have any comments or success stories or issues that you might want to share with us on septic tanks?
Because Tampa Bay is becoming more urbanized over time, we have fewer and fewer septic systems. They're on central sewer primarily now. We do have pockets of septic systems, and certainly in some of the more rural areas, we still have septic systems. But most of the urbanized area, which is at least half of our watershed, is on central sewer. So the septic systems, unlike some of the other estuaries, certainly around the state, are not as much of an issue in Tampa Bay as they are in some others.
I can give just a moment another comment on that. That some of our other estuary programs have looked at and have had as part of their plans dealing with septic tanks that maybe have been shown to be contributing significantly. I think the key always is that you have to understand your sources, you have to understand what is causing the situations you're seeing, and if the septic tanks have been a major contributor to a particular condition, then it may very well be one of your priorities to deal with that. And we've seen that in some of our MPs. It's not an across-the-board thing. It is a case-by-case thing, because we have certain areas where septic tanks, in fact, have worked very well. In fact, for other reasons, have actually been a superior approach. So it's a case-by-case, but it's an important consideration.
Pause 1 second. Just going to move the mic, so if y'all want to hold your ears, because it's probably going to freak it. Keep that here.
It's on.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry.
Terrell, thank you very much for your presentation. I think what was important, one of the comments you made, is how important our economy and environment are together, and the fact that you've done all this and made these environmental improvements. You did not sacrifice growth. Things continue to happen. I think that's very important as we look at several things in Florida. I don't think we can conserve our way out of this. I mean, there's going to be a bit of restoration that we're going to simply have to do. So I think that's critical. I think what you mentioned also with the science is so critical, because the first thing I remember, Keith and I, right after the oil spill, sitting down with Dick Snyder and a couple people from UWF, and we sat down in a meeting with them, and we asked them, we said, okay, what would you do if you could do anything else? What would you do going forward? And they said, well, I'd do an NEP, but they don't do those anymore, so how do we get this problem started? And that's where we got kicked off with Daryl and where we sort of went from there. So a very scientific approach. I would say, Jessica, from your comment, I'd like to thank Daryl and Bill for putting this on, because so much of this is really for us to kind of get an idea as to what we want to do with organization. I think there's a lot of shaping still happen. I certainly think we've got to be cognizant of all the issues of Florida, so I think the Tampa Bay model will somehow need to fit within ours, because obviously we have other rules that we have to think about in some of the ways that they do it. But I think that discussion that's what this whole meeting was about, was how do we begin to look and hear and think about how we would do this going forward. But you know, as we start looking at that in some of the models, and certainly we have some of the same models you have coming out of the host would seem more logical. One of the things was funding. Charlie, I was kind of curious, what is your budget in Pinellas County?
We have about a $1.9 billion budget. Of that, is about $600 million is general fund. Everything else is pretty well off the table before we even get going. So closer to that $600 million for our general fund.
Okay. And I just want to get a figure for that and realize that we put some money forward. We have a group that operates under the Planning Council that is an environmental group, and we certainly contribute money into that, and it's sort of similar. So there are some mechanisms we have. I think one of the important parts is, Charlie, and you and I talked about this a little bit at the break, that's not the only money you're putting in. I mean, I've got 3 staff members from the Escambia County staff that are here in this attendance. I mean, there's a significant amount of in-kind services. They're already doing stuff environmentally within Escambia County.
Oh, well, we have, again, quite frankly, there was some neglect over the years, and in the last 5 to 7 years, we've been spending millions to catch up. We have a stormwater fee now, which is part of cleaning up. I mean, if you look at a map of Pinellas and you look at, we don't know how many ponds and lakes we have in Pinellas. We just don't. We've got a creek system, so we're spending millions to clean that up. That contributes to the quality. We've got staff. We've got environmental staff that go out there, and the project I mentioned is kind of the no pun, but the watershed project we have is Lake Seminole. That's a project that's been going on for 10 years at least, and you know, I hope that it's complete before my time is done in Pinellas County. So we're spending millions and millions of dollars. Absolutely, that $75,000 contribution is just part of it, and we have that. You know, we have we have our regional planning council that we're a membership of. We have T-BARTA that we're a membership of. We have our MPOs. We have some other regional things. It's you know, it's challenged to find those dollars, and some years you have to do it, but the return on investment has been well worth it for us. And talking about the economy, when your first thing is that I didn't mention is Holly was talking about the jobs that rely on a quality bay, but also as our housing stock has rebounded, there's not a lot of residences right on the beach. That's more, you know, condominiums and hotels. But on the other side, where the bay is, the prices of our houses have gone up, and also proportionally as far as the return of the quality of the bay. You know, you're not going to get $1 million purchase on a home if you're looking out over a mucky bay. So that's part of the picture too.
And I appreciate you being here. Look forward to seeing you next week. But thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Holly and Roberta, a question for y'all. You mentioned the importance of having all stakeholders and all groups represented. Have you ever run into the issue where a very important stakeholder or group did not come to the table, and how successful were you getting them to the table? For example, when we put together a Pensacola Bay watershed management plan 10 years ago, we had trouble getting the agricultural community to come. Sometimes there are stakeholders that are in denial that they're part of the issue. For example, there might be a coal burning power plant that we know atmospheric deposition can be a huge pollutant loading to nitrogen to a bay. So how did you deal with stakeholders that weren't forthcoming and weren't coming to your groups?
We had a challenge with agriculture, and there seemed to be two systems in place. We had our Mobile and Baldwin County Soil and Water Conservation Districts who worked directly with the farmers and hosted the NRCS staff of the coast, and then there was the National Estuary Program. And I'm not even really sure why there was that division, but when we did watershed planning in areas where there was typically the agriculture is in the headwaters, we could not get those farmers to the table. We tried to pass a stormwater fee, and it's a long, convoluted process for doing anything in Alabama. The farmers were exempt from this stormwater fee just to try to get them on board, and they still voted against it, and they were very negative about it and in the public domain. So we let it all sit for a while, and then when we got the first NIFWIF grant, the first thing we did was reach out to Mobile and Baldwin County Soil and Water Districts and ask them if they would be willing to manage the watershed planning process. So now we give them a grant. we have a professional services contract with each one of them to manage one of these watershed management plans. We had them come in, the first couple that we did, we had them be part of the steering committee so they would learn the process. And now they're excited partners. I mean, they love it. They're doing what they need to do. And as far as pulling in the agriculture, what they're doing is they don't come to community meetings. They're too busy, so we just go to where they are. We typically hire an engineering firm. The engineering firm will meet with NRCS, and they will go one-on-one to the farmers. And what we're finding is, in several cases, again, perception being that agriculture is the big bad wolf, they're not. They do have cover crops, they're doing BMPs, and they're actually, good stewards. So it's perception versus reality. And so our ability to be able to promote that, we have good farmers, it just snowballs.
I'd like to thank you all also for participating today. And my question's for Holly. The economic study with the Healthy Bay, I'm familiar with did you all partner with the Planning Council on that particular, and that was a REMI model, correct?
It was a REMI model.
Okay, we're actually looking, the Westwater Regional Planning Council is considering doing something similar, because I've been going over your study that you all did down there, the Planning Council did, partnering with you all.
Mm-hmm.
And we're looking at more of a regional approach to target Perdido Bay, Pensacola, Choctawhatchee, and St. Andrews Bay, because that covers our regional council. How beneficial was that study for you? Were you able to use that to leverage funds on an economic level for grants? I just kind of want to know how that's supported your efforts as an NEP.
I think that has been one of our most important studies over the last 5 years, just because it looked at a different angle than some of the other, purely environmental studies that we typically do. And it also allowed us to reach a much broader audience than our typical, environmental focus. And so it's been very important. And it was the Regional Planning Council that did the work with the REMI model. And one of the things they looked at that I think was so compelling to the business community was the difference between a house on the bay and one just half a mile away, or a hamburger on the bay versus one that was just, and so they looked at some case studies that were grounded in actual, in data, not just the modeling results, but the data.
It was very unique to see when I looked through the study, the various comparisons that were used, and also the surveys that were done by through the private sector, public sector, industries such as that. That's great to hear on our end, because we have the REMI model, and we partner, of course, with Tampa Bay Planning Council. So, I look forward to doing some more work with them and being more familiar with the model itself, because certainly I think that will be a benefit for our region as well.
Yeah.
Thank you again.
I think that link to economy is really important. And again, the fact that you can have a healthy economy and a healthy environment, and they support each other. And I think that's really a really critical message.
Thank you again for all your presentations and your time and helping us weave this all together. I have a few questions for Commissioner Justice. Does your county have a local option sales tax? Do you also fall under the Healthy Beaches with the Health Department? Your stormwater tax, bed tax? How much of your bed tax goes back towards the environment? And how much of your bed tax goes directly towards tourism and beach restoration, nourishment type projects?
So the question was, do we ever get rain in Pinellas County? The stormwater fee is something that has actually about 14 cities. We have 24 municipalities in Pinellas County. About 2/3 of our populace is incorporated, and 1/3 is in unincorporated. And about 14 or 15 of those cities already had a stormwater fee ranging from $4 a month to $19 a month, I think was the highest. And they have been using that for cleaning up the ditches and some of the ponds. And so we've been talking, or the county before I got there, was been talking for a long time about getting a county-wide stormwater fee. It really makes more sense to do it county-wide than kind of piecemeal. But the philosophy was that, the county hadn't been doing it had never done it. So we implemented a fee, and I think it's around an average of about $13 for a typical home, up and down a little bit depending on impervious surface you have, just in the unincorporated area, just to kind of try and catch up. And that's about $17 million, I think, give or take, a year in those maintenance projects. I'm not sure about the Healthy Beaches part of it. We are? Okay. So I rely on my scientist. The tourist tax, we levy 5 cents tourist tax. Half of 1 penny, I think, goes for beach renourishment. That is under the, other funds go towards capital projects, museums, stadium. We pay off Tropicana Field this September 30th. So we'll be done paying off Tropicana Field, ready to potentially build a new one maybe. Or if you're looking for a baseball team, there's apparently they're interested in looking around. Marketing, it's about 66% goes towards marketing and operations of our CVB, and about 34% go towards the beach renourishment and those capital projects. Part of that is paying off two minor league improvements at 2 minor league spring training stadiums in Clearwater and Dunedin, and $2.5 million is going to pay for construction of the Dolly Museum, which is the only one of its kind in North America. Did I hit your what else?
And the last was local options.
We do have a local option, Penny for Pinellas. That it expires in 2019. We've been in talks now with our our municipal partners about putting it on the ballot in 2017 to begin in 2020, so that we have the planning time for our projects. A lot of that has gone towards it's all infrastructure. A big chunk of that is we have a brand new criminal justice complex, jails, courts, and a EOC center, which is our sheriff's hub, but it's also the only truly, it says Cat 5, but it's actually better than Cat 5 center for our Emergency Operations Center. Sure.
I have a question about, you have a great funding structure where you sort of agreed up front by interlocal agreement what the contribution is. So I just have a question over the life of the estuary program, you know, when there are bad budget times or, you know, the recession. I mean, how did things play out? Did the formula have to be adjusted? Did you get any people that tried to drop out, or were people just, you know, continue to contribute and recognize the importance, and, you know, sort of what was the track record when times are bad?
I can answer that from the staff position here. Our local governments agreed to participate as funding entities in 1991 when we were initiated, based on the population in their particular jurisdiction at the time. So it ranged from a high of $83,000 a year for a large county, Pinellas County is about 75, down to 13 for one of our smaller cities. So, you know, it ranged based on population within the watershed. That funding formula did not change until this summer, when we took a look at, we went through a strategic planning session. One of the things that was identified as a real critical element was to become less dependent on external sources of funding, including federal funding. Part of that was because EPA's funding does fluctuate on a yearly basis based on congressional appropriations. And so there was a concern that federal appropriations would become lower over time, and with the idea that the policy board wanted to maintain the level of service that our staff provides, that the local governments would need to increase their contribution to offset potential reductions from EPA, become less dependent on EPA. We went through an amended and restated interlocal agreement that was approved by our policy board about a year ago, and it's been going through the approval from each of the local governments and the parties since then. We have everyone's signature now except one last county and they're scheduled to approve it in June, later on this month. So great news. It's the funding structure now is for increase of about 2.5% per year by each of the funding entities over a 5-year period. We will reevaluate at that point and find out how we're doing in terms of being able to maintain again the structure of and the services we provide, which is significant, you know, outreach and education and science focus there. So but the level of funding from our local counties and cities remained constant from 1991 through just last year. We've been able to compensate for that by applying for a lot of additional external grants and being very successful with that, and supporting some of our staff on staff salary on external grants.
If I could, the one advice I would say is that when if you're setting it up and you're basing it on a formula, is to allow some flexibility in there, because when it was set up, Pinellas has pretty much maintained our population. We haven't changed, but one of our other partners' population has dramatically increased, yet the funding is still so. That can create a little bit of a heartache with the budgeting folks in our office, but it's something that we've worked through, but it's something to think about as you're setting up the structure.
Well, that's quite a success story.
Yeah, I think it is. It's the return on investment that really is very important.
Other questions? Yeah, can I ask? Can you talk about branding of your estuary program? And, you know, what I mean by that is wherever I go within the state, outside the state, when you talk about Tampa Bay estuary program, within the first 30 seconds, somebody mentions seagrasses. So you know, your brand is sort of seagrasses, and I was wondering how important is branding for an estuary program, whether it's seagrasses or something else?
I can start that. I think having a goal that encompasses so many different things. It encompasses water quality. It encompasses the fishing that people want, the clear water, that sort of thing, has been really, really critical. So finding a resource that really resonates is really, really important. And then, our staff does a lot of work with getting information out in scientific publications, as well as more public-friendly publications overall. And so the seagrass goal has been the brand for Tampa Bay, and it's because it does incorporate all those priorities that were identified by the public early on, I think.
Roberta, do you have
We are in the process of developing a clean water future campaign because our focus has been on removal from ADEM's 303 impaired list. So I guess if you were to say, do we have a brand, I would say it's in development and it's around clean water. That's it. That's it.
I can make a comment on that. You may or may not know that any River Lagoon, Charlotte Harbor NEP, and Sarasota NEP all have as one of their principal goals is seagrass restoration, SAD restoration. And it's because in these systems, light attenuation, clarity is important in each one of those systems. And in fact, I think in many of your systems, it is also a critical component. So you may want to think seriously about whether one, it's a naturally occurring resource here, where that is, and whether it might make sense for you, because it is what is the principal driving force in River Lagoon, Charlotte Harbor, Sarasota, and
A quick question about staffing. Can you give us the numbers you have for your staffing for each program, and just kind of the general annual costs that we could expect in Northwest Florida?
I can start. We have a staff of 6. 3 of us are scientists, and we have an outreach coordinator, project manager, and a program manager that also works with our finances. We actually contract for our payroll and auditing types of things. So that's an external, which I like because it's an independent review of our finances, and it's kept us having clean audits for many years. Our total operating budget that and we don't have any vehicles or boats. We do rent, have rent and computers, that sort of thing. Our total operating budget is about $700,000 a year for 6 staff and office space and everything that goes along with that.
We have 6 staff. 2 of them are cost shared with Sea Grant, and we have and we just got an EPA. It's an internal personnel agreement, so we're cost sharing with the EPA for our deputy director. We are administratively sponsored by the Dolphin Island Sea Lab, which is a quasi-public agency within the state of Alabama, so they cover our rent. But then we cover some of their programmatic costs that benefit the implementation of our CCNP. And our total budget is somewhere between $550,000 and $625,000. What we do is a lot of contracting out, professional services contracts. But it's somewhere within that range, depending on how many professional services contracts we think we might need in any given year.
Just a quick comment on that, going around the other NEPs, a lot of it depends upon what they have taken on. For example, Mobile Bay, as they're taking on more and more watershed management and taking on more money, they have a need to increase their staff and may want to continue that. But the base program typically has been a director a scientist, public outreach, and an administrative support. That's minimal as you'll go around the NEPs around the country. The smallest you'll see, that will be about what it is. The next things that usually get added are a grant writer, who usually is also a scientist or a technical person. And that's because the NEPs have found that this is a service that they provide to the community to bring in money and write grants, and they've become very good at it. It's a really important component for the NEPs if you'll ask them. And then sometimes they add an additional projects manager if they are doing a lot of implementation projects. So that give you kind of an idea of what most of the NEPs are doing.
Just to add.
What's the average cost? What would be the average cost for a program at a minimum?
As I've looked at the budgets for our NEPs, and I've looked at how much is staff, how much is just, we're looking usually in the $250,000 to $300,000 range to cover staff, to cover the administrative components. And then they usually have somewhere in the range of $100,000 to $200,000 or more that they have some discretion over that they can put into implementation, outreach, etc., grants. So, is that 250,000 to 300,000 just to cover the staff?
At this point,
Depends
no.
on how many staff.
Exactly.
At this point now, no.
No, it's more.
It's more than that now.
Yeah. And for us, we added a position a year ago to specifically focus on bringing in the business community and introducing them to the estuary, to the watershed, taking them out, really cultivating relationships within the private sector to get them to do the right thing. And so that's a new position for us, which is a little bit unique. But yeah, no, ours is, and part of it is it depends on how old you are. When you're younger, you know, when I started, I didn't make what I make now. I've been there for over 10 years now, so you know the salaries grow over time, especially if you have the same staff in place. So, and what benefit, you know, our benefit pass, our fringe rate is 42% through the state of Alabama. So that's a huge. That's why we're moving toward professional services contracts, because that's such a big cost for us, and the administrative indirect cost that we pay to the C-Lab is another big chunk of ours.
Oh, anyone else? I thought it was another question in queue. Is there any other questions? All right. Well, so two quick things. First off, before I forget, I've already forgot 3 times. If you haven't signed in and put your email down, please do, because we'll be emailing everybody the presentations that were done today. And so I just want to, again, thank everybody on the panel for coming. This has been awesome. And then I'd like to, one more round of applause for yourselves, because you're here and interested. That's
So now I would just like to make an invitation. You know, we're about 2.5 hours away from here, so if any of you ever would like to come and visit our program, we would love to have you. We have alligators and lots of water moccasins, but we'd love to have you.
So before I release y'all, I did bring a pad, and so that I don't get yelled at for buying it. What I wanted to do, I won't get yelled at. I'll get yelled at for other things. So a question I have, I mean, as a group now, and I want to invite everybody as the group, are there key things that we want to take away from today, like action steps or action items, or things we don't want to forget? In other words, I think it's been really great and a lot of information is exchanged. Are there key things that we want to take away that when we send this email to everybody that I'll include? In other words, like, are there things we want to do, or follow-up maybe when the grant or awards are announced? Do we want to have a follow-up meeting? Those kind of things. So I just want to kind of open that up now to everyone. So Tim would be the icebreaker.
I would suggest a follow-up meeting because we're
do this, and I got to start writing.
Sure.
So
I would suggest a follow-up meeting because unless I'm sorely mistaken, this first round of the bucket 2 is indeed the first round, and there's going to be follow-ups, and we can all work in collaboration with each other and try to move this forward for future pot 2, bucket 2 distributions.
Jim Muller, Bay County. I would just ask, as we actually start taking steps further, like working on the swim plans and everything, to try and make it a kind of a comprehensive announcement to people that here's what we're going to do, here's the time frame. If you're asking for technical team members, have people volunteer for that or not, or whatever structure you're using, just so we have an idea of what's going on, people are informed, we can participate if we wish, or if we're asked to do so, so that we have an idea of what is happening. And I do think that follow-up emails as it progresses would be beneficial, as the funded priority list, when that comes out, we should let everybody know that's out, what's on the list, and any additional steps that DEP or EPA, whoever thinks people should take to facilitate us moving forward on this.
So I wrote comprehensive outreach on next steps and needs. So again, I'm hearing you, but if I butcher the message, I'm trying to. Is that good? Okay. Anybody else?
Again, hopefully, if the proposal is funded. I'm sorry, I was looking to see if I could get a reaction, a little head nod. But
I'll look at Bill and Phil.
Oh, okay. Poker face. No, if it gets funded, again, the follow-up meeting, I think that as these things start to get set up, I mentioned about the structure and what are the different options to be using. Putting together these management conferences, I think, is going to be key. And because, I think, again, down in Southwest Florida, Tampa Bay, Sarasota Bay, Charlotte Harbor, I mean, they're all adjacent. It's going to be the same situation here. And there are some occasions when it makes sense for those estuary programs to operate kind of collectively and sometimes independently. But I don't think you want to tax too many of the same people to serve on multiple estuary programs. So I guess I think it really is important for these estuary programs to be set up collectively, really, or in a coordinated fashion, so that way they're not inadvertently working at odds or asking the same people to do similar things in different programs or whatnot, but just, again, getting everybody on the same page early.
So I've got strategic and collaborate, again, grammar, strategic and collaboration when setting up EPs to maximize efficiency and effectiveness. Does that work? And okay. Anybody else?
I have a suggestion.
Yes, ma'am.
Following up on Phil's question about branding and Holly's statement about, SAVs being really their driver or coordinator, convener, whatever. Look, and the question about 5 estuaries in one program versus 1 estuary in one program, if you could put together a work group to just start looking at that. It doesn't have to be anything huge, but is there one common issue? For us it's sediment, for you it's SAV. Is there something that's happening in each one of these estuaries that you might be able to convene around instead of making 5 estuary programs?
I think that definitely that's the direction to go, because I know here in this region there's been a lot of talk of a regional approach to this effort. For those meetings, I think it's really important not only to have the county governments, but to also have your stakeholders and also the CPA, for instance, for fishermen, people that are actually out on the ground, with their boots wet, seeing the issues firsthand. That's going to be where we find the collaboration on what the common ground is
don't forget those scientists and those resource managers. You have Fish and Wildlife here.
We convened a meeting in August of 2011. We developed a white paper with the University of West Florida and all the stakeholders within our large West Florida bays. So we had representatives from Perdido Bay, Escambia, Choctawhatchee, St. Andrew, and we asked what were the stressors to your system, what were the threats, what were the issues. And each of our bays, Northwest Florida bays, have legacy contaminants, very different animals from one another. So they're all site-specific, and yet we all have the same issues with fragmentation of the landscape, sedimentation, stormwater runoff, a lot of ag in the northern and Ensbar counties that often overlooked, but there are headwaters. So we've compiled that, but again, funding is always tight, and a year after the oil spill, there was none. But so we have that, and I'll make that available to you and to whomever
Not
else.
me.
Well, I mean,
Sea Grant. You have Sea Grant in this room, and they have great extension agents.
Exactly. And the Nature Conservancy was at the table. We had all the stakeholders. We had all the states. We were very comprehensive in that. One thing I'd like to add to the list is PPE, and I'm not talking about personal protection equipment, PPE. At this point, with the collaboration and the discussions we're having, I'm talking about personality, politics, and ego. We need to set those all aside so that we can be very effective and really move us forward so that our grandchildren's grandchildren have some of these resources that we consider important left for them. So
I think some of that gets set aside as you develop your common goals, because
Right.
then you're all working towards a common purpose.
Like any other organization, the NEPs went through forming, storming, norming to get to performing. And some were in storming longer than others. And a lot of that depended upon how much animosity had been built up prior to them trying to come together. But I think we can say that all of our NEPs are now into performing. And it seems like for the most part everybody gets along.
That's great. Anybody else? Any final thoughts from anyone?
I want to say one thing about size. The key on these programs are the ability for people to get together and to be able to work together. You will have meetings that people will have to come to, and commute distance makes a little difference. We see this in some of our NEPs. When they're really big, it makes it a lot harder for the collaboration. When they're medium-sized, they get efficiencies and people can get there. When you get real small, you can get real focused, but each size makes a difference in how you can manage your program. So think about that based on what your resources are, where you are, the people who need to be there, and let that be a factor that you consider in this.
And part of that's in your structure for the NEP, how you have your executive committee, you have your management council, advisory committees, to where different sizes have different dynamics and are able to contribute.
Indeed. The smaller they are, the more specific they can be. The larger they are, the higher level they can be.
All right. Well, unless there's any other last chance for panel, any other thoughts, words of wisdom? Audience? So Bob, as the director, don't get any thoughts that you want to throw out?
No.
Other than throwing light, this is doing no good other than.
Great meeting. This is where it happens.
All right.
It's good.
Well, thank you everybody for attending again. In the room, so feel free to take a drink. Thank you. Well done. Thank you very much. Good to see you.
Dr.